I flew back from England to surprise my daughter. Instead of a hug, I found her chained like an animal in the garage, barely breathing in weak, dying gasps. The rusty garage door creaked open. The stench of mold and blood hit me instantly. There, on the freezing concrete floor, lay my Laura. A thick iron chain was wrapped tightly around her frail ankle, leaving swollen black and purple bruises across her skin. Her clothes were torn and covered in dirt. The beautiful face I remembered was now pale, hollow, and lifeless. Her cracked lips trembled weakly. She did not even recognize her own father. Her empty eyes were drowning in the terror of someone trapped in a living hell. My heart nearly stopped. Rage exploded through my chest and burned straight into my brain. During 35 years as a financial detective, I had faced some of the most dangerous criminals imaginable. I had seen the darkest corners of human nature. But never once did I imagine my own daughter would become the victim of something this monstrous. They thought I was just a harmless retired old man. Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. Grab a drink, get some snacks, sit back comfortably, and remember this: everyone in these stories had every chance to do the right thing. They simply chose wrong. Subscribe and leave comment number 1 so we can begin. I promise you're going to love this story. I rushed forward and tore the chain apart with everything I had left in me. I pulled my daughter into my arms. Her body was terrifyingly light, fragile as paper. My hands shook as I touched the bleeding wounds covering her skin. Whoever did this would pay. I would not simply expose them. I would use the mind of a predator to destroy them completely. The hunt had officially begun. The scream of ambulance sirens ripped through the San Jose night. I sat inside the emergency vehicle, gripping Laura's ice-cold hand. She remained unconscious. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room, doctors stripped away her filthy, torn clothes, revealing a horrifying truth that left everyone in the room speechless. These were not fresh injuries. They were a roadmap of 6 months of brutal torture. Deep lash marks covered Laura's arms. Dark bruises spread across her stomach. Worst of all were the horrific chain wounds around her ankles. The flesh had already begun to rot. The head doctor looked at me and slowly shook his head. He said my daughter was severely malnourished and suffering from devastating psychological trauma. 3 days later, Laura finally woke up. The moment she saw me, tears streamed down her face. Her voice was weak and broken as she described the 6 months of hell she had endured inside that house. The monsters behind it were none other than her husband Tyler and his vicious mother Vilma. Right after the wedding, their true faces emerged. Vilma began isolating Laura with endless, cruel insults. She confiscated her phone and cut off every connection to the outside world. Day after day, she poisoned Laura's mind, telling her she was worthless and a burden to the family. Tyler pretended to protect her at first, but eventually he became the cruelest abuser of all. He locked Laura inside the garage. He starved her for days in the freezing Northern California cold. Every time Laura cried and begged for mercy, the only answer she received was another savage beating from the man she once called her husband. I stood beside my daughter's hospital bed, listening to every painful word. My heart shattered, but the instincts of a veteran detective slowly returned. I did not cry. Tears were useless now. Instead, a punishment began taking shape inside my mind. As I studied the wounds covering Laura's body, my professional instincts warned me that this nightmare was not driven by hatred alone. Something far more terrifying was hiding beneath it. Tyler and Vilma were protecting a secret connected to something they desired even more than human life itself, and I was about to uncover every last piece of their darkness. I stepped out of Laura's hospital room, leaving her drifting in and out of sleep beneath heavy pain medication. The cold San Jose wind cut through the night, but inside me there was only the fire of revenge. After 35 years as a financial detective, I understood one thing better than most people alive. Every brutal crime in this world, no matter how carefully disguised, always grows from the same poisoned root: money. Human voices carry hidden signals like cards in a poker player's hand. As I replayed Laura's trembling pleas in my mind, I realized Tyler and his mother Vilma were not torturing her merely for cruelty's sake. They were forcing her into something extremely important. The hunt had officially begun. A retired financial detective does not solve problems with fists. I solve them with numbers, money trails, and razor-sharp financial records. I pulled out my phone and called the 2 most trusted allies of my life. The first was Wade, a legendary criminal defense attorney known in California as the courtroom butcher. The second was Xavier, a private investigator with one of the most feared intelligence networks in the state. 3 hours later, we gathered inside a hidden office in downtown San Jose. On the massive wooden table, I dropped photographs of the iron chain and the bruises covering Laura's body. I looked at both men, my voice colder than ice. I want these monsters destroyed. Attorney Wade narrowed his eyes while flipping through Laura's medical reports. Xavier remained silent, tapping his fingers slowly against the table. My war team was ready. I opened my laptop and accessed the linked banking systems tied to Laura's personal accounts. My daughter possessed an inheritance fund worth nearly $1 million left behind by her late mother. The account was supposed to be protected under strict financial security. But the moment the first numbers appeared on the screen, my eyes narrowed sharply. The money trail was wrong. Over the past 6 months, hundreds of thousands of dollars had been systematically drained from the account. I immediately began comparing the withdrawal dates with Laura's medical records and emergency visits. A horrifying truth slowly emerged from the cold, lifeless numbers. Numbers never lie. But now they were telling a story so monstrous that even a man like me felt a chill crawl down his spine. My detective instincts quickly recognized a terrifying pattern between the beatings Laura suffered and the checks being cashed from her inheritance account. Every time Laura resisted them, money disappeared. Every time large sums were transferred, Laura ended up injured. The pattern was too precise to be coincidence. Tyler and Vilma were not simply abusing my daughter. They were breaking her down piece by piece, torturing her until she signed away her fortune. But then I reached the final page of the financial statements, and what I discovered there made the entire room fall silent. The numbers on my computer screen danced before my eyes, cold and merciless. I sat motionless in the dark office, my fingers gripping the edge of the desk so tightly they turned white. The truth was becoming painfully clear through every transaction line. The bruises covering my daughter's body were not just signs of abuse. They were receipts. Receipts for the $850,000 stolen from her. The timing between the financial transactions and Laura's injuries matched with horrifying precision. I began reading the dates aloud to Wade and Xavier, my voice steady despite the rage boiling inside me. March 15th. Laura suffered broken ribs. $50,000 withdrawn. April 22nd. Kidney trauma. $75,000 transferred to an intermediary account. Every time my daughter refused to sign a transfer authorization, they escalated the violence. They beat her, starved her, chained her inside the garage until physical agony shattered her will. And the moment Laura finally signed the paperwork, the money vanished instantly. This was no ordinary domestic violence case. This was organized financial torture, a carefully engineered extortion operation designed by predators who understood exactly how much pain it took to break a human being. The total stolen amount had reached $850,000. Laura's entire inheritance fund was gone. I dug deeper into the metadata attached to the online banking transfers. Every login IP address traced directly back to Tyler and Vilma's residence. But as I followed the outgoing money trail more closely, something unusual caught my attention. The money never stayed with them. It was immediately scattered across offshore accounts and online gambling networks. These vultures were desperate for cash. Tyler and Vilma had been feeding their greed with my daughter's blood. They believed they had erased every trace behind them. But they made one fatal mistake. Money always leaves fingerprints, and a financial detective knows exactly where to look. I turned toward Xavier and told him to dig deeper into the family's past. I wanted to know where the money was truly going, and who was pulling the strings behind this nightmare. Several hours later, Xavier returned with a classified investigation file. The moment I opened the first page, my eyes locked onto a photograph of an unfamiliar woman. Everything inside me went cold. A third player had entered the board. According to Xavier's report, her name was Vanessa Carrington, 42 years old, former casino financial consultant in Las Vegas. Multiple sealed fraud investigations. Suspected connections to underground money laundering operations stretching from Nevada to offshore banking networks in Cyprus and Macau. And most importantly, she had been in constant contact with Tyler for the last 7 months. Phone records, private encrypted emails, secret wire transfers. The evidence was everywhere. Wade leaned over my shoulder while flipping through the pages. His expression darkened immediately. "This woman isn't just helping them steal money," he said quietly. "She's teaching them how to disappear it." Then Xavier dropped the final piece of information onto the desk. Vanessa had recently purchased a private medical insurance package through an illegal broker network. The beneficiary listed on the policy made the air inside the room turn ice cold. Laura Bennett. A massive life insurance payout worth $3 million. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Then the horrifying truth finally clicked into place inside my mind. Tyler and Vilma were never planning to keep Laura alive. The torture, the starvation, the isolation. It had all been preparation for something far worse. And somewhere out there, Vanessa Carrington was helping them finish the job. The classified file slid beneath the glow of the desk lamp as I turned the next page. The image of a perfect family shattered completely. Xavier had uncovered the filthiest secrets buried inside Tyler and Vilma's past. Laura's educated, polished husband was nothing more than a complete failure hiding behind an expensive smile. Tyler had been fired from his financial firm a year earlier for fraud. On top of that, he was drowning in gambling debt totaling $120,000. Now, I understood why he had hunted Laura's money like a starving animal. His mother Vilma was no better. The elegant woman who loved pretending to be sophisticated had a previous fraud conviction in another state. She was the true architect behind this nightmare. Vilma knew exactly how to psychologically destroy a young woman. She knew how to isolate, manipulate, and slowly crush someone until resistance disappeared completely. They were professional vultures. The moment they smelled money, they moved in to tear their victim apart. But the third person in the file caught my attention the most. Her name was Vanessa. Young, beautiful, ambitious, and Tyler's secret mistress. Using advanced recovery methods, Xavier managed to restore deleted encrypted messages exchanged between Tyler and Vanessa through an anonymous messaging app. The moment I read those messages, rage shook through my entire body. Tyler promised Vanessa a luxurious future together in Hawaii. He told her to stay patient because he was almost finished. In one message, he bragged that he was taking the final steps to secure all of Laura's remaining money. Even worse, Tyler assured Vanessa that his marriage was already beyond saving. "I'll deal with her soon," he wrote. Then I found the most disgusting part of all. Tyler had used Laura's stolen inheritance money to purchase a luxury beachfront condo under Vanessa's name. While my daughter was chained inside a freezing garage, starving and barely alive, Tyler and his mistress were drinking expensive wine at luxury resorts beneath the Hawaiian sun. The contrast made me sick. Laura suffered in darkness while her husband celebrated with another woman using blood money ripped from her broken body. Their greed had crossed every boundary of humanity. They believed their plan was flawless, but they forgot one critical thing. The moment a hunter begins building a case file, every movement of the prey becomes visible. I studied Tyler and Vilma's travel schedule carefully. At that exact moment, both of them were enjoying a vacation in Hawaii funded entirely by Laura's stolen inheritance. They believed my daughter would slowly die alone inside the locked garage before anyone ever discovered her. But as I continued reading deeper into the recovered messages between Tyler and his mother, I uncovered something far more horrifying than financial theft. Laura's imprisonment had never been only about stealing money. They were preparing a final act. A permanent solution. A murder designed to leave no trace behind. Wade leaned closer beside me as another recovered message appeared on the screen. Tyler had sent it only 9 days earlier. "If her condition keeps getting worse, nobody will question it anymore." Vilma's reply came seconds later. "Good. Once the insurance clears, we disappear." The room fell silent. Then Xavier opened another encrypted attachment recovered from Tyler's cloud storage. Inside was a detailed medical document forged under Laura's name. According to the fake records, Laura supposedly suffered from severe depression, suicidal tendencies, and long-term self-harm behavior. There were fabricated psychiatric evaluations, forged prescriptions, even falsified notes describing emotional instability. They were building a perfect narrative. If Laura died, the world would believe she destroyed herself. Not murdered, not tortured, not starved, suicidal. Every bruise would be explained away. Every injury blamed on mental illness. Every missing dollar hidden beneath fake medical evidence. And then I saw the final file. A scanned reservation for a private cremation service scheduled exactly 12 days from now. No funeral, no autopsy, no investigation, just ashes. Tyler and Vilma were not merely planning to kill my daughter. They were preparing to erase her existence completely. I sat silently in the darkness of the office. the low humming sound from the laptop cooling fan drilled into my skull. Across the screen, recovered data from Tyler's personal computer continued scrolling endlessly. Financial terminology and digital code filled the monitor. For a financial detective, digital footprints never lie. They are the purest evidence of the evil hiding inside human beings. I began examining Tyler's internet search history from the previous 3 months. The phrases appearing on the screen made the blood inside my veins turn cold. How to dispose of a body without evidence. Countries without extradition treaties. Forged wills and legal validity of patient signatures. A cold sweat formed across my forehead. My chest rose violently with rage as the horrifying truth finally became undeniable. These vultures were not merely planning to abandon Laura. They were preparing to murder her. Tyler and Vilma intended to force Laura into signing a fraudulent will. According to the forged documents, all remaining inheritance rights and assets would transfer directly to Tyler upon Laura's death. Afterward, they planned to stage either a fatal accident or a perfect disappearance somewhere along a remote coastline. Then they would flee overseas with blood-soaked money to a country beyond American extradition laws. My trembling hand slowly closed the laptop screen. If I had returned only a few days later, my daughter would have vanished from this world forever. The cruelty of Tyler and Vilma had surpassed even my darkest imagination. They viewed Laura's life as nothing more than an obstacle standing between them and luxury. But they made one catastrophic mistake. They underestimated the predator hunting them. If you've made it this far, then this story probably stirred something inside you. Please help us with one quick thing. Like and subscribe. Leave comment number 5 so I know you're still here. A lot of people watch without doing it, but it costs nothing and means everything to us. I immediately called Wade and Xavier back into the office. I threw the folder containing Tyler's search history onto the table. My voice was calm, cold, final. The hunt ends now. I already knew Tyler and his mother were scheduled to fly back from Hawaii to San Jose the following day. They believed Laura had already taken her final breath inside that locked garage. They were returning to clean up the crime scene and activate the forged will. What they did not know was that a very special welcome had already been prepared for them at San Jose International Airport. The trap was ready, and the tiger was waiting. Wade moved first. Within hours, he coordinated directly with federal investigators and financial crime units. Xavier deployed his network across the airport, monitoring every arrival gate, surveillance feed, and vehicle exit route. Meanwhile, I sat quietly inside an unmarked operations van parked near Terminal B, staring at Tyler's photograph taped beside the dashboard. The same smiling face Laura once loved, the same monster who chained her like an animal. Morning finally arrived. Flight HA-407 from Honolulu landed exactly on schedule. The terminal doors slid open, and there they were. Tyler stepped out first, wearing designer sunglasses and a white luxury resort shirt. Beside him walked Vilma, elegant as always, carrying expensive shopping bags purchased with my daughter's stolen inheritance. Neither one looked worried. Neither one looked guilty. They were laughing while Laura fought to stay alive in a hospital bed. My jaw tightened so hard it hurt. Then Xavier's voice crackled softly through the radio. Target confirmed. They're moving toward baggage claim. The trap closed instantly. 4 federal agents emerged from the crowd without warning. 2 more blocked the terminal exit. Tyler froze mid-step as badges flashed beneath the airport lights. Federal agents! Don't move! Vilma screamed first. Tyler tried to run. Big mistake. Before he could take a second step, 2 agents slammed him face first against the polished airport floor. His sunglasses shattered beside his cheek. Travelers stopped in shock as handcuffs snapped tightly around his wrists. Vilma began shrieking hysterically about lawyers and misunderstandings. Then Wade calmly stepped forward, holding a thick legal folder. Conspiracy to commit murder, financial fraud, kidnapping, aggravated torture, forgery, attempted homicide. Each charge landed like a hammer strike. Tyler's face drained of all color. But the true moment of terror came seconds later, because that was when I finally stepped out of the shadows. Tyler slowly lifted his head from the floor and looked directly at me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw genuine fear inside his eyes. San Jose International Airport was packed that afternoon. Jet engines roared across the runway while the sharp smell of aviation fuel filled the air. I stood hidden behind a massive concrete pillar near the International Arrivals Hall, dressed in my familiar black coat. My detective eyes never left the passenger exit doors. Beside me, 4 undercover officers and Attorney Wade were already in position. The trap had been set, and the prey was walking straight into it. The automatic glass doors slid open. Tyler and his mother Vilma emerged from the crowd. They looked absurdly flashy. Tyler wore a loud Hawaiian shirt designer sunglasses and carried an expensive luxury bag. Vilma appeared draped in elegant silk with a brand new diamond necklace glittering beneath the airport lights. They laughed together as they walked, looking like wealthy tourists returning from paradise. The sight made my blood boil. Their luxury stood in horrifying contrast to the image of Laura barely breathing on the freezing garage floor. Every designer item they wore, every expensive vacation they enjoyed had been purchased with my daughter's suffering. Pain had financed their paradise. I clenched my fists tightly but forced myself to remain calm. A true predator never rushes before the strike. Tyler and Vilma casually headed toward the airport exit, fully convinced they were free. In their minds, Laura had already died alone inside that locked house. They had returned only to clean up the final pieces of their perfect crime. Then Tyler's smile suddenly vanished. 4 undercover officers closed in, instantly surrounding them from every direction. Tyler stammered in confusion, demanding to know what was happening. An officer stepped forward and presented the emergency arrest warrant in a cold, emotionless voice. Domestic torture, unlawful imprisonment, financial fraud, attempted murder. The metallic snap of handcuffs echoed through the terminal. Tyler's sunglasses crashed onto the floor. All color drained from his face. Vilma immediately began screaming hysterically, begging nearby travelers for help while insisting there had been some terrible mistake. But nobody moved. Nobody helped them. I slowly stepped out from the shadows, and Tyler saw me. The moment our eyes locked, pure terror flooded his face. He finally understood that the harmless, retired old man he once ignored had become the architect of the cage now closing around him. But the airport arrest was only the beginning. The real war would take place inside the courtroom, because Wade had already prepared something far more devastating than prison, a secret weapon so brutal it would force Tyler and Vilma to turn against each other in a desperate attempt to survive. 2 days later, the courtroom was overflowing with reporters, investigators, and federal prosecutors. Cameras flashed endlessly as Tyler and Vilma sat at the defense table in prison uniforms, looking nothing like the glamorous predators who had walked through the airport terminal. Tyler kept avoiding his mother's eyes. Vilma looked ready to collapse. That was exactly what Wade wanted. He stood slowly before the jury, calm and confident, carrying a single sealed evidence envelope. Then he delivered the first strike. "Ladies and gentlemen," Wade said quietly, "the prosecution believes these 2 defendants worked together equally." He paused. "But the evidence tells a different story." The entire courtroom fell silent. Then Wade revealed the hidden weapon. Xavier had secretly recovered private recordings from Tyler's encrypted cloud storage. Recordings Tyler never realized still existed. Audio files, video clips, private conversations. And inside those recordings, Tyler had secretly blamed everything on his mother. The first recording played through the courtroom speakers. Tyler's nervous voice filled the room. "My mother planned everything. She pushed me into it. I never wanted Laura hurt this badly." Vilma's head snapped violently toward her son. Shock, betrayal, rage. The second recording hit even harder. Tyler admitted that Vilma forged psychiatric records and manipulated the fake suicide narrative. He described how she taught him to isolate Laura psychologically before escalating the abuse. Vilma suddenly exploded in panic. "He's lying," she screamed. "He did worse than me," exactly as Wade predicted. The predators began devouring each other alive. Then came the final recording. The courtroom froze as Tyler's own voice calmly described the murder plan. "We wait until she's weak enough. Then we move her to the boat. Nobody will ever find anything in the ocean." Several jurors visibly recoiled in horror. One woman in the gallery began crying. Tyler realized too late what had happened. Wade had not merely built a legal case. He had detonated their trust in each other. Every lie collapsed, every alliance shattered, and as Tyler stared helplessly across the courtroom, Vilma slowly pointed at her own son with trembling hands. Then she whispered the words that destroyed both of them forever. "He was the one who wanted the insurance money first. The fluorescent courtroom lights of Santa Clara County cast a harsh glow across every tense face inside the chamber. The trial of Tyler and Vilma had become a media obsession. Reporters crowded every bench while cameras waited outside for the final verdict. I sat in the front row reserved for the victim's family. My face remained calm as stone, but inside me every instinct was razor sharp. Across the courtroom, Tyler and Vilma sat beside their defense attorney. Their luxurious vacation clothes were gone now, replaced by faded gray-orange jail uniforms. Tyler looked exhausted. Vilma appeared older by 20 years. Then the legal war truly began. Attorney Wade rose slowly and approached the center of the courtroom. He did not rely on emotional speeches or dramatic theatrics. He used the deadliest weapon possible against predators like Tyler: facts, numbers, evidence. Wade presented the financial statements first, followed by forensic handwriting analysis reports. He explained in precise detail how Laura's signatures on the transfer documents revealed unmistakable signs of coercion. The pen pressure patterns told the story. The signatures were shaky, broken, erratic. Most importantly, the heavy pressure marks at the end of each signature revealed panic and physical distress, consistent with forced signing under torture. The courtroom became completely silent. Tyler trembled visibly beside the defense table. Then the cowardice began. He blamed his mother for everything. "She planned it," Tyler shouted desperately. "My mother made me do all of it." Vilma slowly turned toward her son, her eyes burning with fury. The fracture between the two monsters had finally appeared exactly as I intended, but the best part of the trap had not yet arrived. Wade smiled faintly and tapped the wooden podium with his fingers. "The prosecution calls its next witness." The courtroom doors opened, and Vanessa walked in. The moment Tyler saw her, all color vanished from his face. He stood up so fast, his chair crashed backward against the floor. Vanessa walked confidently toward the witness stand without even looking at him. In exchange for legal leniency and protection from conspiracy charges, she had chosen to save herself. And she came armed with everything. Vanessa surrendered the phone containing Tyler's secret messages, encrypted conversations, and recorded phone calls. One by one, the recordings echoed through the courtroom speakers. Tyler's own voice filled the room, boasting, laughing, bragging about keeping Laura imprisoned. In one recording, Tyler proudly described how weak Laura had become after weeks of starvation. In another, he promised Vanessa they would soon disappear together after securing the forged inheritance documents. "I just need her signature one more time," Tyler's voice said coldly through the speakers. "Then we're free." Gasps spread through the courtroom. Tyler completely lost control. He lunged toward the witness stand, screaming hysterically, "You traitor! You used me! You ruined everything!" Court security rushed forward instantly, slamming Tyler against the defense table as he continued thrashing wildly. Nearby spectators recoiled in shock while reporters scribbled furiously across notepads. Vilma sat frozen beside him, covering her face while sobbing uncontrollably. The truth had finally been dragged fully into the light. Their perfect crime had been destroyed by the very woman Tyler trusted most. The judge slammed his gavel repeatedly until silence returned. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Sentencing. Every eye inside the courtroom locked onto the elderly judge as he adjusted his glasses and began reading the final ruling. "Tyler Bennett," the judge said firmly, "this court finds you guilty of aggravated torture, attempted murder, unlawful imprisonment, conspiracy to commit fraud, and financial exploitation." Tyler's breathing stopped. "You are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole." A wave of shock swept through the gallery. Then the judge turned toward Vilma. "Vilma Bennett, this court finds you equally responsible for orchestrating and facilitating these crimes." Her sentence followed seconds later. 40 years. No early release. No parole eligibility. Vilma collapsed into tears. Tyler simply stared ahead like a dead man already buried. But my final moment with him came later that night. Inside the holding facility beneath the courthouse. A guard allowed me 5 minutes alone with Tyler before transfer processing. He sat behind the reinforced glass partition, handcuffed and broken. The arrogance was gone now. The expensive clothes. The smug smile. The illusion of power. All dead. Tyler slowly lifted his eyes toward me. For the first time since this nightmare began, he looked afraid. Not angry. Not defiant. Terrified. I stepped closer to the glass and spoke quietly. "You know the worst part of all this, Tyler. His lips trembled, but no words came out. I stared directly into his hollow eyes. Laura survived. Tyler's entire body froze. I leaned even closer. She's alive. She remembers everything. And every single year for the rest of your miserable life. She'll still be out there breathing while you rot in a cage. Tyler's face shattered completely. Then I delivered the final words that would haunt him forever. You tried to erase my daughter from this world. I paused. Now the world will spend the rest of your life forgetting you instead. The old judge's gavel slammed against the wooden bench with a sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom. That single sound ended every desperate struggle the monsters had left. The courtroom fell completely silent. Tyler and Vilma stood with lowered heads as the sentences were read. Their faces looked pale and lifeless like ashes after a fire. For unlawful imprisonment, aggravated abuse, and organized financial fraud, Tyler was sentenced to 15 years in state prison without bail eligibility. Vilma received 8 years as an accomplice and psychological architect behind the crimes. Every asset tied to them was seized by court order, including the luxury condo purchased under Vanessa's name. The recovered funds were transferred back into Laura's financial account to cover her treatment and long-term recovery. Justice had arrived. The justice of numbers. The justice of money trails. The justice of truth. And it had struck with absolute precision. Court officers stepped forward to escort the prisoners toward the transport vehicle waiting outside. But as Vilma passed my row, she suddenly stopped. Her eyes burned red with hatred. Pointing at me through tears, she screamed that I was a cruel man. She accused me of using power and money to destroy her son's life. I rose slowly from my seat and adjusted the collar of my black coat. Then I looked directly into her eyes. Cold, steady, unshaken. "You say I destroyed him?" I asked quietly. I took one step closer. "No. He destroyed himself the moment he valued money more than a human life." Vilma's face twisted in fury as officers dragged her away beneath the endless flashes of reporters' cameras. The tiger had finished its hunt. I turned and shook hands with Wade and Xavier. The courtroom battle was over. Laura's stolen $850,000 had been restored and would now help rebuild the life Tyler tried to erase. But for a father like me, 15 years in prison, me still did not feel like the true ending. There was one final thing I needed to do before closing this case forever. I needed to face Tyler one last time. Alone. 3 days later, I entered the isolated visitation wing of the state prison. The steel doors clanged shut behind me one after another as guards escorted me deeper into the facility. The air smelled of rust, bleach, and despair. Finally, I reached the reinforced glass visitation room. Tyler was already sitting there. Prison had changed him quickly. The arrogance was gone. The confidence was gone. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes. His prison uniform looked wrinkled and oversized, as if even the fabric no longer respected him. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Tyler slowly picked up the prison phone on the other side of the glass. I did the same. His voice came out weak. "Why are you here?" I stared at him through the thick security glass. "Because there's one final truth you deserve to hear." Tyler swallowed nervously. I leaned slightly forward. "The insurance policy you killed for," his eyes widened instantly. "It never would have paid you a single dollar." Silence. Pure shock spread across his face. I continued calmly. "The policy contained a hidden fraud protection clause added by Laura's mother years ago. Any death connected to domestic abuse, criminal coercion, or financial manipulation automatically voided the payout." Tyler's breathing became uneven. I could almost hear his entire world collapsing. All that torture, all that greed, all those plans. I paused. "You destroyed your own life for absolutely nothing." Tyler gripped the phone harder, his hands trembling violently. "No," he whispered. "That's impossible." But I wasn't finished. "There's one more thing you should know." He looked up slowly, fear returning to his eyes. "Laura is recovering." I watched pain spread across his face. "She's walking again. She's eating again. And someday she'll build a new life far away from this nightmare." I leaned closer to the glass one final time. "But you," my voice became ice cold. "You'll wake up inside this cage every morning for the next 15 years, knowing the woman you tried to erase survived, while your own name dies forgotten behind concrete walls." Tyler's lips trembled. Then I delivered the final sentence. The greatest punishment for predators like you isn't prison. I held his terrified gaze. It's living long enough to understand you lost everything for nothing. I walked into the state prison visitation room. The air was cold and heavy with the smell of bleach. Behind the thick, reinforced glass sat Tyler in a worn prison uniform. His face was hollow. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes, and despair filled every inch of him. I picked up the visitation phone and looked directly into his eyes. My voice dropped low, cold, and powerful. Tyler lowered his head, unable to face the gaze of the hunter who had finally cornered him. Then I spoke slowly. You forgot one simple thing, Tyler. I paused. Parents remember everything. And with that I hung up the phone, leaving him alone with the crushing silence of his prison cell and the endless torment inside his own mind. After everything that happened, Laura was transferred to one of the nation's leading rehabilitation centers. Her condition steadily improved. The wounds covering her body slowly healed, and little by little, happiness began returning to my daughter's smile. This story carries a painful lesson for all of us. Greed can transform even the closest family members into monsters. Never stay silent in the face of abuse. Protect yourself and the people you love from emotional manipulation, financial exploitation, and psychological traps. Justice is not simply a prison sentence. It is the reminder that nobody can destroy a father's child and walk away in peace. Join our community by liking and subscribing for more raw, emotional, family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being part of this space. Because in the end, family should always be the strongest wall standing between the people you love and the darkness waiting outside. Dad, we've made our decision. We're selling the house at Kerr Lake. You have until the end of the month to move out. Every single word hit my ears. Clear, cruel. I felt my chest tighten like a steel beam collapsing under too much pressure. This house was not just wooden walls. It was my blood, my sweat, my entire life. It carried the soul of Renee, my late wife. And now the son I sacrificed everything to raise was ordering me out like I was some old piece of furniture. It was a windy May morning at Kerr Lake. I was sitting by the dock watching the waves roll softly against the wooden posts. My phone vibrated on the table. Brad, my oldest son. 8:14 in the morning. I answered the call. Before I could even say hello, his cold, arrogant voice cut through the line. He did not ask how I was doing. He did not care what I was doing. He went straight to business like a man clearing out unwanted inventory. I stayed silent. My hand tightened around the armrest of the chair. Rage climbed into my throat like fire. I am a structural engineer. I spent my entire life calculating pressure, stress points, and structural failure, but I failed to calculate the breaking point in my own son's character. Brad kept talking in that superior tone. He said the real estate market was hot. He said I was too old to live alone in such a large house. He said he had already found a buyer. He had even signed a brokerage agreement without asking for my permission. Not once. He treated me like a confused old man who would simply obey. Betrayal always tastes bitter. But betrayal from your own blood tastes like destruction. He wanted to sell this house for a few $100,000 to fund the lifestyle of his new wife. They thought I had outlived my usefulness. They thought I was powerless. Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. Settle in because this story is going to take you a long way. Hit the like button and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Brad ended the call with a fake little reminder as if he were doing me a favor. I placed the phone down on the table and stared across the lake. Suddenly the anger disappeared. In its place came something far more dangerous. Calm. A cold smile slowly spread across my face. A house can only stand if the foundation is strong. Brad and Tim wanted to tear mine apart. What they did not know was this: an engineer always keeps a backup blueprint. After the long beep from Brad's call finally faded away, the world around me became strangely silent. I sat motionless in the old armchair. My eyes drifted down to the cedar floorboards beneath my feet. Time had faded their color, but they were still solid and unshaken. I am a structural engineer. My entire life has revolved around blueprints, concrete, and load-bearing structures. I understand the value of a strong foundation better than most people, and this house at Kerr Lake was the greatest structure I ever built. I started building it in the spring of 1993. Back then, Renee and I had only been married a few years. We did not have much money, but we had enormous dreams. I still remember the feeling of pouring the first concrete foundation with my own hands. Every brick carried my sweat and my wife's smile. Renee stood right there on the porch corner, holding a glass of lemonade, her eyes glowing with excitement as our dream slowly rose from the ground. Together, we picked every wooden panel and every screw. I designed this house to survive the harshest Wisconsin winters. For more than 30 years, its structure had never trembled before a single storm. This was the house where Brad and Tim took their first steps. This was the house that held their childhood laughter. And this was the house that carried the final warmth of Renee before illness took her away from me. Every corner of this place carried her spirit. To me, this house was part of my soul. It was legacy. It was love. It was the final promise connecting me to my late wife. But to my sons, it was nothing more than property converted into cash. Brad and Tim looked at these walls and saw numbers. They either forgot or chose to forget that this very house had raised them into men. Selling it was like taking a hammer and smashing apart the memory of their own mother piece by piece. The pain inside me slowly turned into heartbreak. I lifted my eyes toward the family photo hanging in the living room. Renee was smiling in the picture, holding our two young boys in her arms. How had those innocent little boys become this cold and greedy? The warmth of memory vanished beneath the weight of reality. My sons had changed. Somewhere along the way, the rust of greed had begun eating through this family, and I had been too blind to see it. But Brad and Tim underestimated their engineer father. They thought I would cry, beg, or quietly pack my belongings and leave in humiliation. They believed they controlled the entire game after deciding the fate of my property without permission. What they failed to understand was this greed makes people blind, and blind people always miss the most important structural flaw. This battle had only just begun, and I had already found the fatal crack in their cruel little plan. The betrayal born from greed does not arrive like an explosion. It spreads like rust, quietly eating away at the load-bearing structure of a house. Slowly, patiently, corroding everything from the inside out. And by the time you finally notice it, the entire structure has already collapsed. As I sat there, I realized with bitter clarity that my family had been destroyed by that same silent corrosion. The one behind it all was Brad. My oldest son used to be a good kid. But everything changed after he married his new wife. She had an endless appetite for luxury. Designer clothes, expensive vacations, flashy parties meant to impress strangers who did not care about them. Brad's salary could never keep up with the bottomless greed she carried inside her. Financial pressure slowly transformed him into an arrogant and selfish man. He stopped seeing my home as family. He started seeing it as a lifeboat for his dying bank account. And then there was Tim, my younger son. He was not the mastermind, but he was something worse in his own way. A coward. Tim had always been afraid of his older brother. He had no backbone, no conviction of his own. Deep down, he knew forcing their father out of his home was wrong. He knew selling the house behind my back was unforgivable. But he nodded anyway. His weakness disgusted me almost more than Brad's cruelty. I spent my entire life teaching my sons about honor, gratitude, and responsibility. And in the end, what did I get in return? Two grown men circling their own father like vultures, waiting to strip away the last roof over his head. For the first time, I began to feel uneasy. Not for myself, for what they might do next. Because greed never stops once it awakens. They had already hired a realtor without permission. They had already given me a deadline to leave my own home, which meant they had likely prepared something far more calculated behind the scenes. I looked out the window toward Kerr Lake. The sky had darkened. A real storm was coming. But my sons had made one critical mistake. In construction, even the smallest crack in a blueprint can bring down an entire skyscraper. Brad and Tim were amateurs trying to outplay a veteran engineer. They thought I was old, weak, confused. They believed I knew nothing about the schemes unfolding behind my back. What they did not realize was this. Overconfidence is the deadliest structural flaw of all. And that flaw was about to lead them straight into a trap they would never see coming. The next phone call on Sunday would expose every ugly truth hiding beneath their smiling faces. Just as I predicted, the next call came on Sunday. That day, rain poured endlessly from the sky. Heavy drops slammed against the windows as if they were trying to shatter the last traces of peace left inside the house. Then my phone rang. This time, it was a group call from both Brad and Tim. I turned on speakerphone. Brad's voice came first, carrying the same impatient, arrogant tone as always. But this time I could also hear Tim's weak, guilty muttering in the background. Brad wasted no time. He announced that they had officially signed a contract with a real estate agent named Mark Benson. According to him, the house at Kerr Lake had been appraised at $390,000, a pathetic number, an insult to a solidly built home sitting on prime lakefront property. But my sons were desperate for money. They were willing to sell their mother's memories and throw their father out onto the street as long as cash arrived quickly enough. I asked them only one question, my voice perfectly calm. You signed a contract without asking me first. Brad laughed softly through the phone. He said it did not matter. He said Mark Benson was a professional and had already found a buyer willing to pay within the month. That was when Tim finally spoke. He told me I should cooperate. He said moving into a small apartment downtown would be better for someone my age. They worked together surprisingly well. One pushed, the other pretended to comfort. Together, they were trying to corner me. Anyone listening to this would feel furious. My own sons were making decisions about the life of the man who had spent decades feeding them, protecting them, and building their future with his bare hands. Inside me, the pressure reached its breaking point. The pride of a father was being trampled. The dignity of an engineer was being mocked. They truly believed I was nothing more than a harmless obstacle standing in their way. Then Brad crossed the final line. In a cold voice, he said that if I refused to move out willingly, they would hire people to pack my belongings for me. The cruelty of those words went beyond anything I had imagined possible. I took a deep breath to hold back the rage boiling inside my chest. I did not yell. I did not cry. And suddenly the silence on my end made them hesitate. They mistook my silence for surrender. They thought the old man was finally broken. Brad ended the call after reminding me about the signing appointment scheduled for the following week. Then, the line went dead. I sat alone in the darkness of the room while the rain continued crashing outside. They thought they had won. They thought they had trapped me with nowhere left to run. But they were wrong. The battle had only begun. The moment the call ended, I stood up and walked toward my office. It was finally time to open the locked security drawer, because hidden inside that drawer was a weapon powerful enough to destroy their entire plan. I walked into my office in complete silence. Outside, the rain continued hammering against the windows, but inside me, the storm had settled. I was no longer angry. A good engineer never lets emotion take control when a structure is on the verge of collapse. I stepped toward the old oak desk. Beneath the right corner was a drawer that always remained locked. I called it the serious drawer. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small silver key. The sharp click of the lock echoed through the empty room. Then I opened the drawer and removed a thick blue folder. It had been sitting there untouched since 2016. Inside were the documents for my second property, a place called Garrison Lake Lodge. The lodge sat deep inside an isolated pine forest somewhere in Wisconsin. No one in my family knew it existed. Not Brad. Not Tim. No one. Back in 2016, after completing a massive construction project, I used my personal savings to quietly purchase the land. Over the years, I secretly transformed it into one of the most luxurious private retreats in the region. I had planned to reveal it as a surprise inheritance for my sons after my death. It was the only legal inheritance they had left. A strange mixture of curiosity and disappointment rose inside me as I flipped through the pages. Photographs of the lodge appeared one after another. The massive stone fireplace. The handcrafted cedar interior. The private lake hidden behind walls of towering pine trees. Its value had skyrocketed over the years. Meanwhile, my sons were desperately clawing over the $390,000 from selling the old Kerr Lake house. They had no idea that their blind greed was about to cost them something worth many times more. I slowly ran my hand across the folder. Their betrayal had finally helped me make a clear decision. My backup blueprint was ready, and now it was time to activate it. I carefully placed the documents into a black leather briefcase. They wanted to play a cruel game with me. Fine. I would play along. I would stay silent and let them keep performing their little victory dance all the way to the closing table. Tomorrow I would meet with my lawyer, and together we would prepare the perfect trap. The next morning I drove downtown to the office of attorney Raymond Castillo. The rain had stopped, but puddles still covered the streets, reflecting the dull gray sky above. A strange mixture of anticipation and tension kept my mind razor sharp. On the passenger seat beside me rested the black leather briefcase containing the Garrison Lake Lodge documents and the legal paperwork for the Kerr Lake house. By then, my home at Kerr Lake had officially been listed online for $390,000. When I saw the listing price, I almost laughed. My sons were fools. They believed they were walking away with a fortune. They had no idea they were throwing away a treasure for pennies just to satisfy temporary greed. And somehow, that insult only strengthened my resolve. I entered Raymond's office a few minutes later. Raymond Castillo had been my lawyer and close friend for years. He greeted me with a firm handshake and a look filled with concern. He had already reviewed the documents I sent him earlier. I sat down calmly and explained my plan. I told him I would not resist. I did not want shouting matches or ugly confrontations with Brad and Tim. Instead, I wanted him to prepare every legal document necessary for the sale. But everything had to happen exactly according to my script. Raymond stared at me in disbelief. He asked if I was truly willing to let my sons go this far. I looked him directly in the eyes and answered in a cold, steady voice. Let them finish their performance. A good engineer never puts out a fire the moment it starts. I'm going to let the fire of their greed grow as large as possible right there at the closing table, and at the exact moment they believe victory is finally theirs, I'll remove the one support beam holding everything together. That was the beginning of my silent game. For the entire following week, I completely cut off contact with both of my sons. I ignored every call, every message, every voicemail. My silence convinced Brad and Tim that I had finally broken down and accepted my fate. A few days later, they sent me the details for the closing appointment at the Lakeland office. Their message was short and cold. Bring your identification. Be there on time. I read the text message slowly and smiled to myself. The blueprint was complete. Every piece was now in position. My silence had become the most dangerous weapon of all. Brad and Tim were confidently marching toward the Lakeland office, without realizing that the room waiting for them was no longer a closing office. It was a legal execution chamber built specifically for them, and in the next chapter, the shock waiting inside that room would shatter everything they thought they controlled. On the morning of the closing, I arrived at the Lakeland office 15 minutes early. The air inside felt heavy, thick with the smell of expensive perfume and polished leather. Tension pressed against my chest like concrete settling under massive weight. I sat silently in the corner of the room, one hand gripping the black leather briefcase beside me. Exactly at 9 o'clock, Brad walked in. Confidence radiated from every step he took. He wore an expensive tailored jacket and polished leather shoes that gleamed beneath the office lights. His face carried the bright excitement of a man convinced he was about to strike gold. He glanced at me with fake sympathy before casually taking the seat across from me. Brad kept scrolling through his phone, smirking to himself. I knew exactly what he was doing, counting money that did not belong to him yet. A few moments later, Tim entered the room. Unlike his brother, he avoided looking at me altogether. His head stayed lowered, guilt written all over his face. Then the buyers arrived. Mr. and Mrs. Marsh entered alongside the realtor Mark Benson. They carried thick folders filled with paperwork. The closing table was finally complete. Benson quickly spread the contracts across the table and pushed them toward Brad with eager hands. Brad grabbed the pen immediately. Without hesitation, he scribbled his signature across the seller's section, as though the house already belonged to him. Then he turned toward me with that same arrogant tone. Dad, your turn. Sign it so we can finish this quickly. Every eye in the room shifted toward me. The contrast between us could not have been clearer. Brad sat there, polished, impatient, intoxicated by greed. Meanwhile, I remained perfectly still, cold, solid, like reinforced concrete. I stared silently at the papers in front of me. This was the moment my son's cruelty reached its peak. They truly believed I would sign away my own home and quietly accept exile from the house I built with my bare hands. Slowly, I placed the leather briefcase on the table. The silence in the room suddenly changed. Brad's smile stiffened. For the first time all morning, uncertainty flickered across his face. He tapped his fingers impatiently against the table. What are you waiting for, Dad? People are waiting. I still said nothing. I simply looked directly into his eyes. It was the cold stare of an engineer who had finally located the fatal fracture inside a collapsing structure. Then I reached into my jacket pocket, but not for a pen. If you've made it this far into the story, then it probably stirred something inside you. Help us out with one quick thing. Like and subscribe. Leave a comment with the number 5 so I know you're still here. A lot of people watch without doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. I pulled out my phone. The screen displayed an incoming call from attorney Raymond Castillo. Without breaking eye contact with Brad, I placed the phone directly in the center of the closing table and turned on speakerphone. Then Raymond's firm voice filled the room, and in a single moment the entire atmosphere changed. Attorney Raymond Castillo's voice came through the speakerphone, sharp and unwavering. Good morning, everyone at the Lakeland office. This is attorney Raymond Castillo, legal representative for Mr. Jude Logan. I have an urgent announcement. The sale of the Kerr Lake property must stop immediately. This contract has absolutely no legal validity. The room fell into dead silence. Brad's arrogant smile vanished instantly. He shot up from his chair, his face burning red with rage. What are you talking about? He shouted into the phone. I'm his son. My brother and I have full authority over this property. Across the table, realtor Mark Benson suddenly began sweating as he frantically flipped through the paperwork. But Raymond's voice remained calm, cold, precise, like a blade sliding through steel. You are mistaken, Brad. You and Tim are listed as heirs under your late mother's estate. However, you failed to read the attached conditions carefully. According to Renee Logan's will, the Kerr Lake house remains under the sole ownership authority of Mr. Jude Logan until the day of his death. Any sale, transfer, or financial agreement requires his direct written consent and signature. Your attempt to sign documents and hire a realtor without your father's authorization is a direct legal violation. This transaction is now officially frozen, and just like that, the truth detonated in the middle of the room. The engineer's strike had landed perfectly. A deep sense of satisfaction rose inside my chest as I watched my son's entire scheme collapse beneath them. Justice had finally arrived. A good engineer always leaves behind a backup design. Brad and Tim thought they could outsmart a man who spent his entire life calculating structural weaknesses and failure points. They were wrong, completely wrong. The buyers, Mr. and Mrs. Marsh, immediately stood from the table in outrage. They felt deceived and manipulated. Within seconds, they gathered their paperwork and announced they were canceling the deal entirely. Before leaving, they threatened legal action against Mark Benson's brokerage company. Benson looked like all the blood had drained from his body. He turned toward Brad with pure hatred burning in his eyes. And then came the collapse. Brad dropped back into his chair and buried his face in his hands. The polished confidence from earlier was gone. Now there was only panic. Pure panic. He looked up at me with trembling eyes. Dad, why would you do this to us? We really need this money. Beside him, Tim had started crying, quietly begging for forgiveness under his breath. I slowly stood from my chair and buttoned my jacket calmly. Then I looked at my sons. But I no longer saw my children. I saw 2 greedy men completely blinded by their own hunger. I looked directly at Brad and spoke only once. You were willing to sell your mother's memory for $390,000. Greed has made both of you blind. Then, I picked up the black leather briefcase from the table. The battle at the Lakeland office was over, and my sons had suffered a humiliating defeat. But I was not finished yet. That was only the first strike, only the first crack destroying the illusion they had built around themselves. Because I still had one final blow waiting for them, one number so massive, it would haunt them for the rest of their lives. I did not rush to leave the Lakeland office. Instead, I stood there quietly, looking down at my 2 broken sons sitting across the table. Panic and despair had swallowed them whole. But for me, the performance was not over yet. Not even close. They still needed to learn the final lesson about the true value of what they had betrayed. Slowly, I placed the black leather briefcase back onto the table. The sharp click of the lock opening echoed through the room once again, drawing Brad's trembling eyes toward me. For a brief second, hope flickered across his face. He thought I was about to change my mind. He thought mercy was coming. But he was wrong. I pulled out the thick blue folder containing the documents for Garrison Lake Lodge. The folder from my serious drawer. Then I tossed it directly in front of him. Look at this. My voice remained calm, but every word carried the weight of concrete collapsing onto steel. Brad's hands shook as he opened the file page by page. His eyes widened the moment he saw photographs of the luxury lodge hidden deep inside the Wisconsin pine forest. Then his breathing stopped completely when he reached the final valuation page. $1.1 million. Slowly, I began to speak. Every sentence cut through the room like a sharpened blade. This is Garrison Lake Lodge. It is worth nearly 3 times more than the Kerr Lake house you were so desperate to sell. I secretly bought and built it back in 2016. My original plan was to leave it to both of you as your inheritance after I was gone. It was supposed to belong to my sons. The room felt like it had just been hit by an explosion. Brad and Tim froze completely. The contrast between the miserable $390,000 they had been fighting over and the $1.1 million they had just lost forever was too much for them to process. Brad's face turned pale as death. His lips trembled uncontrollably. Beside him, Tim broke down, sobbing, pounding his forehead against the table in unbearable regret. For a quick profit, they had destroyed the very foundation of their own future. Then I delivered the final blow, the knockout strike. I looked directly into their shattered faces and spoke one final truth. But that was yesterday's plan. The moment you called me on Sunday, I met with attorney Raymond Castillo. I signed every document transferring full ownership of Garrison Lake Lodge to a non-profit organization that supports underprivileged children. You will not receive a single dollar from my estate. The silence afterward was unbearable. Then I gave them the final sentence they would carry for the rest of their lives. Your greed erased you from the blueprint of my future. I picked up my briefcase and turned toward the door without hesitation. Behind me came the sound of choking sobs and the complete collapse of 2 men who had just lost everything. But even then, the worst consequence for Brad had not arrived yet, and the true peace waiting for the old engineer still lay ahead. In the days following that disastrous closing meeting, my sons' lives spiraled into a collapse they could no longer stop. Brad soon found himself drowning in serious legal trouble. Mr. and Mrs. Marsh officially filed a lawsuit against him for fraud and the illegal attempt to sell property that was never his to control. And the woman he sacrificed everything for, the wife who loved luxury designer labels and expensive appearances, she wasted no time. The moment she realized Brad was buried in debt, she filed for divorce and walked away with what little money he had left. Tim suffered differently. He drowned in guilt. Day after day, he sent messages begging for forgiveness. Long apologies, broken promises, desperate pleas. But it was too late. Once the foundation of trust collapses, it can never truly be rebuilt. As for me, I moved into Garrison Lake Lodge. The peace there felt almost unreal. That evening, I sat on the wooden porch of the lodge, hidden deep within the Wisconsin pine forest. A glass of red wine rested in my hand while the sunset slowly melted across the still surface of the lake. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. Beside me sat a framed photograph of Renee. I smiled softly at her picture and realized something important. I had protected the honor of this family. My story became proof of one simple truth about life. Greed is like defective material in construction. It may help you build beautiful illusions for a little while, but eventually it will bring the entire structure crashing down. Respect, family, the love between parent and child. Those things can never be purchased with money. And the price of greed and betrayal will always be far greater than anyone imagines. If you fail to value the foundation of your family one day, you will pay for it with your future. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what lesson you took away from it. I'll see you again in the next story. I lifted my glass and took one final sip of wine while the cool lake breeze drifted through the pine trees around me. The old engineer had finally completed the last blueprint of his life. A blueprint with no room left for betrayal, only peace, only justice. I was 63 years old, living alone, and I believed my son was the only person I could trust. But last week I lied to him about being alone. That lie uncovered a horrifying crime planned against me. I was lucky to survive long enough to tell you this story. Welcome back to Dad's Real Life Revenge. Please subscribe and comment number 1 so we can begin this story. Before we start, I want to remind you of one thing. This is a true story. If you stay until the end, you will understand why I say that. It started every Sunday morning at exactly 7 o'clock. The phone on the wooden table would vibrate right on time. The default ringtone echoed through the empty house. My son, a successful businessman, always called with perfect precision. He asked about the weather. He asked about the hydrangeas blooming outside the house. And always the final question was about the pills. Dad, did you take the white pill yet? Did anyone come by to visit you today? I used to think it was the purest form of devotion from a caring son. I felt proud of how attentive he was. I took the pills exactly the way he instructed me to, without the slightest doubt. This house was too large for an old widower. His voice over the phone was the only thread connecting me to the outside world. But that concern slowly began to carry a different taste. It no longer sounded like love. It sounded like surveillance. Like a prison guard checking whether his inmate was still locked inside the cell. The 7 o'clock phone call became an invisible pressure, crushing down on me. I stared at the cup of coffee, growing cold on the table. The steam had vanished. The silence inside the house began squeezing my chest tighter every day. I glanced toward the plastic pill organizer divided neatly by days of the week. The pills sat there in silence, waiting for me. Or perhaps waiting for the end of me. Love and harm can wear the exact same clothes for a very long time before you finally see through the fabric. That Sunday morning, something small happened that changed everything. Frank, my best friend from college, showed up unexpectedly at my door. He carried a paper bag filled with pastries, and the same bright smile I remembered from 40 years ago. It had been 18 months since this house last heard another person's laughter besides mine. We sat together in the living room talking about old memories, old road trips, old mistakes, old dreams that now sounded like stories from another lifetime. The clock slowly crept towards 7 o'clock. My heart suddenly skipped a beat. Then the familiar ringtone shattered the warm silence of the room. Out of habit, I answered immediately. My son's calm voice came through the speaker. He asked about my health, like always. Asked whether my knees still hurt from the cold weather. Asked whether the hydrangeas outside were blooming again. Then suddenly he asked the question, Dad, is anyone there with you today? I looked at Frank. He smiled casually and motioned for me to keep talking. But in that exact moment, an icy sensation crawled down my spine. The instinct of a man who had lived through more than 6 decades whispered something terrifying into my ear. Hide the truth. I took a slow breath. Then I answered quietly. No, I'm alone today. It was the first time in 18 months that I had lied to my son. A harmless little lie. Or so I thought. Because the reaction on the other end of the call froze the blood in my veins. There was no immediate response, only silence. A long silence. Not peaceful silence, heavy silence, the kind of silence that feels alive. I could hear his faint breathing through the phone. He was thinking, processing the information. And then it came. A strange relief entered his voice, a disturbing softness, like tension had suddenly drained out of his body. Oh, that's good then. Make sure you get some rest, Dad. That single pause before he answered changed everything inside me forever. His relief was not the relief of a loving son knowing his father was safe. It was the relief of a predator realizing the prey was finally alone inside the trap. My hand was still trembling after I ended the call. Frank looked at me with concern and asked whether I was all right. I forced out a weak smile to calm him down. But deep inside me something had cracked wide open. I turned toward the window. Outside, the hydrangeas drooped under the pale morning sunlight. Why was my son relieved to know I was alone? What exactly was he hiding from me? The answer was waiting inside the pillbox the very next morning. And Frank was the one who accidentally saw it first. Monday morning, Frank woke up early and insisted on making breakfast for both of us himself. I sat quietly at the dining table, watching my old friend moving slowly around the kitchen. The smell of freshly ground coffee spread through the house, bringing a false sense of peace into the room. Frank opened the medicine cabinet to grab my weekly pill organizer. By routine, the Saturday compartment should have been completely empty. I had taken those pills 2 days earlier. But suddenly Frank froze. He walked toward me, holding the plastic container in his hand, his forehead wrinkled with confusion. John, what's this little white pill? Why did you leave it in here? I looked down at the transparent compartment. A small, round white pill rested silently at the bottom. My chest tightened instantly. My mind began spinning. I had always been extremely careful about my health. I never forgot my medication, especially my blood pressure prescription. Never. I picked up the pill slowly. Its surface was smooth. No letters, no markings. Then realization hit me like ice water. It looked nothing like the capsules my doctor prescribed. Not even close. None of my medications were white. A horrifying suspicion began crawling through my mind. Who put this pill inside my box? This house was locked down tightly. The smart security system only allowed 2 people access to the front door code. Me and my son. He was the only person who entered my house every Friday afternoon to clean the place and prepare my pills for the following week. The equation was painfully simple, and the answer was so devastating it nearly stopped my breathing. My son had switched my medication, but how long had he been doing it, and why I slipped the pill quietly into my shirt pocket, forcing myself to stay calm so Frank would not panic. But beneath the table my hand had already curled into a tight fist. I stared at the coffee slowly growing cold beside me. The truth was opening in front of me like a bottomless black hole. That pill was not medication. It was evidence. Evidence of a slow and calculated murder. My only son, the person I loved more than my own life, had been poisoning me in silence. And suddenly the terrifying dizziness from the past few months came rushing back into my memory. The nights where my vision blurred, the moments where my legs collapsed beneath me, the terrifying feeling that my heart might simply stop beating before sunrise. Back then I thought old age was finally catching up with me. Now I realized something far worse. Someone had been helping death reach me faster. The white pill rested deep inside my pocket like a piece of frozen ice, and with it came memories I had desperately tried to ignore. For the past 3 months my body had been screaming for help. The dizzy spells came almost every afternoon. Without warning, the floor would tilt beneath my feet. My thoughts drifted constantly inside a thick fog. I lost focus, lost direction, lost pieces of myself little by little. I told myself it was old age. I believed my mind was simply beginning to fade. But the most terrifying part was remembering the moments when my son witnessed those collapses. He would see me stumbling beside the couch, gripping the furniture just to stay standing. His face always filled with panic and concern. "Dad, did you forget your medication again?" His voice sounded so caring. He rushed over to support my weight, guided me gently back to bed, poured me a glass of warm water with his own hands. At the time, I felt deeply moved by his devotion. Now, replaying those memories made my skin crawl, because I finally understood the truth. He saw everything. He watched my body grow weaker day after day from the pills he himself had secretly replaced, and he kept doing it anyway. Some nights I woke up gasping because the room felt unbearably suffocating. The smart climate system inside the house constantly changed temperatures at strange hours. Whenever I questioned it, my son always smiled softly. "I adjusted it for your health, Dad. The weather has been dangerous lately." That kindness now revealed its true face. It was not care. It was control. He wanted me weak. He wanted me exhausted. He wanted me to believe I could no longer take care of myself. I sat alone in the darkness of the living room, staring through the window at the hydrangeas outside slowly wilting from lack of water. I no longer had the strength to care for them. Exactly the future my beloved son seemed to be creating for me. But one mysterious pill was not enough. I needed undeniable proof. I needed to witness what he was doing with my own eyes. That night I made the most dangerous decision of my life. I secretly installed a tiny hidden camera inside the bathroom, directly above the medicine cabinet. Then I connected the feed to my old laptop and waited patiently for Friday to arrive. I had no idea what I was about to discover. But the footage recorded that night completely shattered the heart of a father forever. Friday afternoon arrived exactly as expected. My son walked through the front door carrying a bag of fresh fruit in one hand. He smiled casually, talked normally, acted exactly the way he always did. He cleaned the living room for a while before walking into the bathroom to prepare my medication for the following week. I sat silently in the bedroom nearby, my fingers tightly locked together. The laptop resting on my knees displayed the live feed from the hidden camera. Every instinct inside me whispered the same terrifying truth. This was the moment everything would be exposed. On the small screen, I watched him standing in front of the medicine cabinet. He had no idea a hidden lens was staring at him from the darkness. He opened my weekly pill organizer. Then slowly he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small plastic bottle with no label. My heart stopped. He poured several small white pills into his palm. The same hands I once held while teaching him how to walk were now carefully removing my yellow prescription capsules one by one and replacing them with the white pills. His movements were calm, precise, practiced. He never trembled. Every motion looked disturbingly familiar, like someone repeating a routine they had performed many times before. Occasionally he paused to listen for sounds coming from my bedroom. When he was certain I was not approaching, he continued. The face of my beloved son stared back at me through the screen, but I no longer recognized him. That was not the caring child I raised. That was a cold-blooded predator wearing the face of an angel. Pain crushed my chest so violently I could barely breathe. I covered my mouth with both hands to stop myself from sobbing out loud. Hot tears rolled down my face and splashed onto the laptop keyboard. That was my son, the little boy I once carried in my arms, the child I spent my entire life protecting. And now he was personally guiding his own father toward death. If you've made it this far into the story, then you already know this nightmare is only getting darker. Please take one quick second to like, subscribe, and comment number 2 so I know you're still here with me. Most people watch without doing it, but it truly helps our channel more than you realize. And trust me, what happens next is something you will never see coming. The moment he stepped out of the bathroom, I slammed the laptop shut. I had to use every ounce of strength left inside me to keep my voice steady when he said goodbye before leaving. Then the front door closed. The sound echoed through the house like a coffin lid being sealed shut. I slowly collapsed onto the floor. Alone. Broken. The truth was finally undeniable, but the pain was almost too much to survive. I could not stay silent anymore. If I did nothing, I would die. The next morning I took one of the white pills and went directly to my doctor and the police. What they discovered inside my blood test results was not just poison. It revealed a horrifying secret about my son's real motive. I walked into the police station with a coldness that frightened even me. The weak old man I had been no longer existed after the moment I closed that laptop the night before. On the detective's desk, I placed the small plastic bag containing the white pills alongside the footage from the hidden camera. 2 days later, the blood test results arrived from the central hospital. The older doctor looked at me with deep pity in his eyes. Then he slowly shook his head. He pointed toward the numbers on the medical report. My potassium levels had been pushed down to a dangerously critical point. The white pills were powerful diuretics. For an elderly man with a heart condition like mine, taking them continuously for several months would almost certainly trigger either a stroke or sudden heart failure. A perfect natural death. Clean. Silent. No obvious criminal evidence left behind. I stared at the report in silence while my hands slowly turned numb. My own son had not tried to kill me in anger. He had planned it patiently, scientifically. The financial investigation that followed exposed the rest of the nightmare. My son was drowning in debt. His cryptocurrency investments had collapsed. His real estate projects were frozen. The amount he owed was staggering. He needed money. Fast. A lot of money. Police investigators later found internet searches on his computer about the details of my life insurance policy. A $2 million policy I had signed 10 years earlier. With only one beneficiary. Him. That was the moment I understood the horrifying truth. My life had been reduced to a financial solution. Nothing more. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before walking back into my house that evening. Through the front window I could see the cup of coffee still sitting untouched on the table. Cold. Lifeless. Everything around me suddenly felt disgusting. The police proposed a plan to catch him the following Friday inside my own home. I had to pretend I knew nothing. I had to sit across from my son one final time and act like a helpless father who still trusted him completely. But how do you hug the person trying to murder you? How do you look into your child's eyes and still say the words, "I love you"? The answer waited inside the suffocating confrontation that was about to destroy what remained of our family. Forever. The final Friday finally arrived. 2 plainclothes police officers were already hidden inside the back room of my house. I sat quietly in my armchair, forcing my breathing to remain steady. Then I heard the soft click of the front door unlocking. My son walked inside. The same warm smile rested on his face. The same gentle eyes. The same voice that used to make me feel safe. He walked over to me, placed a bag of groceries on the table, then leaned down beside my chair. His face overflowed with carefully crafted concern. "How are you feeling today, Dad?" Still getting dizzy, I looked directly into the eyes of the child I had spent my entire life raising. My chest tightened so hard it almost crushed the air out of me. But somehow I forced myself to smile. I told him I still felt weak, but seeing him always made me feel better. He nodded with quiet satisfaction. Then he stood up and walked toward the bathroom to perform the same ritual he had repeated every Friday for months. I watched his back disappear down the hallway. Every movement he made was now streaming live to the officers waiting in the next room. A few minutes later, he returned to the living room. In his hands were a glass of warm water and my prepared medication tray. He sat beside me carefully and held the water toward my trembling hands. "Your face looks worse lately, Dad. I think you need a stronger dose of supplements. Go ahead and take them. You'll feel better soon." Every instinct inside my body screamed at me to throw the pills across the room. But I had to finish the performance. I reached for the glass. My fingers brushed against his hand. Ice cold. Then suddenly, before the police revealed themselves, my son leaned forward and wrapped his arms tightly around me. He pressed his mouth close to my ear and whispered softly, "I love you so much, Dad. I want you to stay with me for a very long time." My heart shattered completely, because I knew that beneath those loving words lived a calculated murder plan driven by greed and desperation. And yet in that unbearable moment I still lifted my hand and gently patted his back. I whispered back, "I love you too." And the worst part was that I truly meant it. That was the real tragedy. Not the poison, not the betrayal, but the fact that even after discovering everything, a father's love inside me had refused to die. Then the illusion exploded apart. Heavy footsteps thundered down the hallway. The officers burst into the living room and pinned my son to the ground instantly. The glass shattered. The pills scattered across the floor. My son screamed in shock as the handcuffs snapped around his wrists. But then something happened that froze every person in that room. Because instead of denying the crime, he started laughing. A cold, empty laugh. And the horrifying truth that came out of his mouth next left both me and the police completely speechless. When the handcuffs locked around his wrists, my son did not panic. He did not cry. He did not beg for forgiveness. He simply stood there staring at the two officers with a hollow expression so empty it felt inhuman. Then slowly he turned toward me. A pale smile appeared on his face. And in an eerily calm voice he said, "See, Dad, I told you the world out there is dangerous. I'm the only one who can truly protect you." The room went completely silent. Even the officers froze for a moment. Those words felt far more terrifying than the poison itself. Over the following days, the investigation uncovered something far darker than financial desperation. Police did not only find the mountain of debt, they also discovered hidden psychiatric records my son had kept secret for years. After extensive evaluations, the medical specialists reached a conclusion that left me completely shattered. My son suffered from severe paranoid anxiety disorder. The crushing pressure of financial collapse had slowly broken his mind apart. He became obsessed with control, especially control over me. Yes, the life insurance money was part of the motive, but the most horrifying truth was this. In his twisted mind, he genuinely believed he was protecting me. He believed the outside world was filled with people waiting to harm our family. And according to the broken logic inside his head, the only way to keep me safe forever was to make me weak, dependent, unable to leave him. If I could no longer walk properly, if my memory faded, if I depended entirely on him for survival, then I would always remain under his control. Safe. That was the word he used repeatedly during questioning. Safe. It was not ordinary greed. It was love distorted into something sick and unrecognizable. My son wanted to become the sole savior of my life, even if it meant slowly killing me in the process. That truth hurt far more than simple betrayal ever could. I sat inside the observation room, staring through the one-way glass at my only child. He was murmuring softly to himself. His fingers moved unconsciously through the air, repeating the motion of sorting pills into imaginary compartments. At that moment, I no longer knew what justice even meant. What punishment fits a man who is both a calculated criminal and a deeply broken patient? Prison, a psychiatric institution, mercy, condemnation. The answer would come in a way neither my son nor I could have ever imagined. Instead of a loud courtroom trial and a long prison sentence, justice arrived in a very different form. Based on the psychiatric evaluations and forensic reports, the court ruled that my son would be committed to a mandatory psychiatric treatment facility. Not prison, a place with endless white walls and barred windows. A place where he would finally be forced to face the paranoid monster slowly consuming his mind. The day they transferred him away, I stood at a distance watching the ambulance disappear beyond the line of trees. I did not cry anymore. The pain had burned itself so deeply into me that it transformed into something colder, something empty. I returned home alone. The same house that once felt like an invisible prison suddenly seemed enormous and strangely quiet. The very first thing I did was change every security code connected to the smart home system. Then I picked up the remote control myself and adjusted the living room temperature to 26 degrees. The temperature I personally loved, not the suffocating setting my son used to force on me while pretending it was for my own health. I walked into the bathroom and gathered every unidentified pill bottle I could find. Then I dumped them straight into the trash. The sound of the white pills rattling into the plastic bag echoed through the room like chains finally breaking apart. For the first time in months, my life belonged to me again. I decided when to eat, when to sleep, and most importantly, I controlled my own yellow blood pressure medication with my own hands. I was no longer a week-old prey waiting for judgment from the son I once adored. And strangely enough, I realized something important. My revenge was never about violence. It was never about hatred. The greatest revenge was surviving. Waking up, taking my life back and continuing to live well despite everything that had happened. I lowered myself into the familiar armchair and made myself a fresh cup of hot coffee. Steam rose slowly into the air, carrying a rich smell through the house. For the first time in a very long while, the silence no longer felt suffocating. I looked out the window toward the hydrangeas outside. After days of neglect, they seemed to be slowly recovering beneath the warm sunlight. I truly believed the nightmare was finally over, that justice had won. But the following morning, when I stepped outside into the yard, I noticed something small hidden beneath the hydrangea bushes. And in that instant, I realized the nightmare was not finished yet. Beneath the hydrangea bushes my late wife once cared for so lovingly, I discovered an old spare key buried deep beneath the soft soil. It was the same key I believed had been lost years ago. That was when I realized something even more chilling. My son had been preparing this plan for a very long time. Long before the smart security system was ever installed. This betrayal was not a sudden moment of madness. It was a trap carefully built over years. I slowly sat down on the stone steps and stared at the blue hydrangeas beginning to recover beneath the fresh water I had given them that morning. And for the first time I accepted the cruelest truth of all. Love and destruction can exist inside the same person at the exact same time. My son truly did love me once. I believe that. But illness, fear, and greed twisted that love into something poisonous, something deadly. My story is a warning for anyone listening, because sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are also the ones quietly controlling and destroying you. Please never ignore the small warnings your instincts try to show you. Sometimes a lie told to the world becomes the most honest truth you ever tell yourself. Instinct can become the final lifeline when darkness closes in around you. So pay attention to the moment your heart tells you something is wrong. Listen to it. Follow it, because it might save your life the same way it saved mine. If this story gave you something meaningful to think about, please share it with the people you love, and leave a comment below telling me your thoughts. Thank you for walking beside me through this journey of reclaiming my life here on Dad's Real Life Revenge. Do not forget to subscribe and share your own story in the comments, so you never miss the next hard lesson life may bring. I'll see you in the next video. I stood up slowly and brushed the dirt from my hands. That morning I made my own coffee. I took my own medication. And for the first time in a very long while, I no longer felt dizzy. The early morning sunlight spread across the yard, warming a soul that had finally survived the storm. Six months ago, I walked into a dining room filled with excitement and pride because my daughter had come home. But before that night was over, in a single moment, I realized that the child I had raised and protected for 36 years, Sienna, was sitting across from me with the intention of harming me for money. Welcome back to Dad's Real-Life Revenge. I'm Sterling Vance. Grab a drink, some snacks, get comfortable. And remember this, the people in these stories had every opportunity to do the right thing, they simply chose not to. Leave a comment with the number 1 so we can continue the story, and subscribe, you're going to enjoy this one. $68 million. That was the exact amount sitting in my trust account. It was the price of 42 years spent fighting my way through the business world. And what did I get in return? A calculating look from my own daughter. Cordelia, my devoted wife, had been gone for less than 100 days. Her ashes rested in Lake Norman Cemetery, and the ground above them had barely settled. Yet our only daughter had already scripted a fateful dinner. Sienna walked into the house wearing an elegant black dress. She smiled. The smile was exactly like Cordelia's, but her eyes were completely empty. When had greed begun to hollow out her soul? The contrast tightened my chest. I had spent my entire life shielding her from every storm. I gave her black cards with no spending limit. I bought her the finest luxury apartment downtown when she wanted to move out on her own. I had believed that the bond between father and daughter was something beyond value. But to Sienna, this father's life was worth nothing more than the lifeless numbers written on the pages of a will. The familiar dining room suddenly felt suffocating. The faint scent of candles could not hide the smell of the betrayal that was about to unfold. The clinking of silverware against porcelain echoed with a dry, hollow sound. I watched my beloved daughter place food onto my plate. Her hand trembled slightly. An unusual touch of her handbag. The instincts of a businessman who had survived hundreds of major deals told me that something was wrong. My intuition had never failed me. The outrage rose into my throat as I realized the bitter truth. The child who once cried hysterically when she saw me cut my hand was now calmly staring at her father's glass of wine with a dark scheme in mind. I took a deep breath. This fight for survival had only just begun. I stared at the glass of deep red wine on the table. The light from the chandelier reflected off its still surface. It shimmered with an eerie glow. My mind drifted back 42 years. Back then, my entire fortune consisted of an old pickup truck and a head full of ambition. I drove that truck through freezing winter nights. I slept at roadside rest stops along the highway. This body had been pushed beyond its limits more times than I could count, just to lay the first brick of what would become today's logistics empire. Through all those stormy years, Cordelia was always by my side. She shared dry loaves of bread with me. She stayed awake through countless nights, helping me count every small order. We built this empire with sweat, tears, and blood. When Sienna was born, I swore that my daughter would never have to endure even a fraction of the hardship we had faced. I wanted her to live the life of a princess. But I was wrong. Unlimited indulgence had raised a monster. Ever since Cordelia died, half of my world had collapsed. The other half was the irreparable fracture between Sienna and me. I tried to make up for it. I tried to talk to her, but every time we faced each other, all I saw was a wall of ice. The wooden bridge connecting father and daughter was cracking a little more each day under the weight of greed. She did not want my love. She wanted the enormous fortune under my control. She looked at the chairman's seat of the corporation like a starving tiger stalking its prey. I looked directly into Sienna's eyes. She quickly looked away and adjusted her collar. The silence surrounding the wine glass between us felt like a death sentence hanging in the air. I already knew what her next move would be. This betrayal was more than a slap in my face. It was a desecration of Cordelia's memory. I reached for the wedding ring on my finger. Fury and heartbreak merged into a single emotion. Tonight, at this very dining table, I would have to face an enemy I once called my daughter. But Sienna was not acting alone. The shadow behind her had finally stepped into the light. A familiar set of footsteps echoed from the dining room entrance. The man who walked in wore a smile that was far too perfect. A smile that sent a chill down my spine. Gideon Cross. My son-in-law walked into the room. He was wearing an expensive custom-tailored suit paid for with the very money I had earned through blood and sweat. His appearance was always so polished that it felt artificial. His hair was perfectly groomed. The smile on his lips was flawless. So flawless that it made people uneasy. He walked over to Sienna and placed a hand on her shoulder. A gesture of complicity. He bowed his head toward me with his usual respectful tone, but his eyes were filled with hunger. I knew exactly what lay beneath that polished exterior. Gideon was nothing more than a complete failure hiding behind the image of a businessman. 3 years earlier, he had burned through $2 million in a fraudulent real estate project. I had been forced to clean up the disaster to save my daughter from embarrassment. A year later, he managed to make another $5 million disappear in the cryptocurrency market. He was addicted to alcohol and drowning in enormous debts. Every time he failed, I was the one signing checks worth millions of dollars to rescue his hollow reputation. He saw me as a bottomless cash machine. But today my alcoholic son-in-law was behaving unusually well. He declined the glass of premium wine I offered him. Instead, he poured himself a glass of water. He said he was cleansing his body in preparation for a new project. My suspicions immediately rose to their highest level. A starving wolf does not suddenly refuse a good meal. It only means that it has set its sights on prey far larger. My life, the atmosphere around the dinner table grew thick and heavy. Gideon's arrival made the purpose of this dinner clearer than ever. He kept glancing at the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist. He was counting the minutes. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my chest. Bitterness rose in my throat. The daughter I loved most had chosen to stand beside this broken man against her own father. Gideon began pouring water into his glass. His eyes shifted toward Sienna. He gave a slight nod. A silent signal had been sent. I clenched my fist beneath the oak table. They thought I was a confused old man who could be led around by the nose, but they had forgotten who I was. I watched every one of Sienna's movements with absolute focus. Her hand drifted once again toward the expensive handbag beside her. The same action, repeated over and over, almost obsessively. Sienna's nervousness had gone far beyond her ability to control it. Around the dinner table, the occasional clink of silverware sounded strangely out of rhythm. I was not watching her eyes. I was watching those trembling hands. The counting discipline I had developed as a businessman allowed me to record everything with precision. The fourth time, she lightly tapped the strap of her crocodile leather Chanel handbag. The seventh time, she pretended to bend down and adjust the position of the bag beneath her chair. Then came the 11th time, her eyes fixed on the gold-plated clasp of the handbag. 11 touches in less than 15 minutes. For a man who had conducted thousands of negotiations, that was not an unconscious habit. It was the behavior of someone hiding a crime. The atmosphere in the dining room had become thick with pretense. Every now and then Gideon would tell a dull joke about the stock market. He laughed by himself. Sienna forced a polite smile in response. Her face looked pale beneath the chandelier light. Beads of sweat dotted her forehead even though the air conditioner was set to 20 degrees Celsius. Pain tore through me. The daughter I had once carried in my arms, the child I had stayed awake all night caring for whenever she had a high fever. Now she sat barely a meter away from me, counting down the moments until her father entered eternity. The silence surrounding the glass of red wine before me felt like a deadly trap. I maintained the calm expression of the chairman of a leading logistics corporation. I smiled and nodded at Gideon's flattery. But beneath the oak table, my fingers were clenched so tightly that they had turned white. My instincts rose stronger than ever. I could smell betrayal. I could see the cracks spreading across the wooden bridge of family devotion. Frustration and fury climbed into my throat, but I forced them back down. I needed proof. I needed to know exactly how they intended to strike. Suddenly, Sienna stood up. She said she needed to use the restroom to touch up her makeup. She carried the handbag with her, holding it possessively. Gideon remained at the table. He looked at me with a mysterious expression. Then he nudged my wine glass about 2 centimeters across the table. At that exact moment, the kitchen door opened slightly. A young waiter stepped out carrying a tray of fresh dishes. His eyes were not on the food. They were fixed directly on me. Filled with absolute panic, he was trying to send me a message with nothing but his eyes. A desperate warning. An urgent plea for help. My phone vibrated inside the pocket of my suit jacket. It was a call from the corporation's chief financial officer. I excused myself to Gideon and stepped out onto the nearby balcony. On the other end of the line, he confirmed a critical piece of information. The largest merger of the year had been completed. $68 million had officially been transferred into my secure personal account. An enormous sum. The crowning achievement of my business career, yet at that moment it brought me nothing but a chilling sense of dread. I ended the call and returned to the dining room. Sienna had not yet come back from the restroom. Gideon had temporarily left the table to take another phone call near the main foyer. At that moment, only Silas remained in the dining room with me, the young waiter who had just delivered the food tray. He approached to clear away the used plates. His hands were trembling uncontrollably. The porcelain dishes clattered softly against one another. Silas lowered his head. Pretending to wipe down the table, he leaned close to my ear. His voice was barely above a whisper, only loud enough for the two of us to hear. "Sir, while you were on the phone, your daughter put something into your wine." I froze. Shh. My heart pounded violently. The blood in my veins seemed to turn to ice. Silas's words struck me like a fatal knife driven straight into my chest. Pain tore through my soul. The brutal truth had been exposed in its rawest form. My own daughter truly wanted me dead. Silas looked up at me with frightened but determined eyes. He continued speaking quickly. He told me that his uncle had once worked for a wealthy family. His uncle had witnessed a similar poisoning scheme, but he had remained silent and spent the rest of his life haunted by regret. Silas did not want to watch that tragedy happen again. He swore that what he had seen through the crack of the kitchen door was completely real. I stared at the glass of dark red wine. It sat silently on the table like an invisible death sentence. The chandelier's light reflected through the liquid, giving it an unusual violet tint. The greed of Sienna and Gideon had transformed a celebratory drink into a poisoned cup meant to end a blood bond between father and daughter. 42 years in the business world had never prepared me for a nightmare like this. I took a deep breath to keep myself from falling apart. A surge of outrage and fury rose inside the 68-year-old man I had become. Footsteps echoed from the hallway. Sienna was returning. At the same time, Gideon ended his call and walked back into the room, a trace of triumph hidden behind his smile. They looked at me. They looked at the poisoned wine. The deception had reached its peak. I had to make a decision immediately. Confront them and expose everything, or remain silent and set a trap of my own. Time was now measured in seconds. I picked up the wine glass. My hand did not tremble. I looked directly into my daughter's tense eyes. And in that instant, a bold plan for a switch flashed through my mind. Sienna sat back down in her chair. She stared at my wine glass. Gideon had also returned to his seat. The familiar, flawless smile spread across his face. A brutal internal battle raged inside my mind. I wanted to jump to my feet. I wanted to throw that poisoned glass of wine directly into their faces. I wanted to scream and ask why the daughter I had raised for 36 years could be so cold-blooded. But the composure of a seasoned businessman stopped me. If I confronted them now, they would deny everything. They would destroy the evidence. I needed a perfect revenge. I needed them to bring down this performance with their own hands. I set the wine glass back on the table. Then I glanced towards Silas, who stood tensely in the corner of the room. I gave him a quick wink. Silas was surprisingly intelligent. He understood immediately. Carrying a tray of hot soup, he approached the dining table. Then he deliberately caught his foot on the edge of the oak table. A loud crash echoed through the room. The metal tray and 2 bowls of soup spilled onto the floor beside Gideon's chair. Hot soup splashed across Gideon's trousers. He jumped to his feet and began shouting curses. Sienna immediately turned toward him in alarm and helped him up while trying to clean the stain. For 5 seconds, both of them were completely distracted. 5 seconds that would define the course of my life. My 68-year-old hands moved with the speed of a master magician. Smooth, silent, invisible. I switched my wine glass with Sienna's. The 2 glasses were identical, but now the deadly liquid sat in front of my ungrateful daughter. The safe glass was in my possession. I withdrew my hand and adjusted the collar of my suit. Everything happened in an instant. Without the slightest sound, the illusion surrounding the wine glasses remained perfectly intact. After cleaning himself up, Gideon sat down again with an irritated expression. He shot Silas a razor-sharp glare. Silas lowered his head and mumbled an apology before quickly cleaning up the mess and retreating to the kitchen. The dining room returned to its earlier silence. But the balance of power had completely changed. The counter-trap had been set. Sienna let out a quiet breath of relief. She turned toward me. Her face struggled to regain its artificial cheerfulness. Then she picked up her wine glass. The poisoned wine now rested in her trembling hand. She raised the glass toward me. Gideon immediately lifted his own glass of water. I smiled, a cold smile filled with absolute contempt. Neither of them had any idea that disaster was now calling my daughter's name. Sienna began to speak. Her voice echoed through the suffocating room. The most horrifying chapter of this dinner had officially begun. Sienna raised her wine glass toward me. She smiled, a smile of deception brought to its absolute peak. She congratulated her father on the successful completion of the $68 million deal. She said she wanted to toast to a new beginning for our family after the loss of her mother, Cordelia. The words coming from my own daughter's mouth sounded sweet, yet they were as sharp and cold as blades stabbing into my heart. Sitting beside her, Gideon also raised his glass of water. His eyes sparkled with triumph. He believed the plan was perfect. He believed he was about to become the owner of an enormous fortune. I looked directly into Sienna's eyes. I raised my own safe glass of wine. I nodded slightly. I thanked them for this special dinner. I told them I would never forget this night. Sienna suspected nothing. She lifted the glass to her lips. She took a large sip. Then she drained it completely. The deadly liquid slid smoothly down her throat. I also took a sip from my own wine. Then I calmly set the glass down on the oak table. If you've followed the story this far, I'm sure it has stirred some emotions in you. Please help us with one small favor that only takes a moment. Like and subscribe. Leave a comment with the number 5 so I know you've made it this far, and tell me your prediction for how the story will end to see if you're right. Many people watch without doing that, but it costs you nothing and means a great deal to us. Everything happened so quickly. Gideon stared at me. The perfect smile on his lips suddenly froze. He waited. He waited for me to collapse. He waited for me to clutch my chest in agony. But 5 seconds passed. 10 seconds passed. I was still sitting there. I was still looking at him with a terrifying silence. The change in Gideon's expression was incredibly satisfying. His eyes widened in horror. He looked at my empty wine glass. Then he looked at Sienna's glass. Utter confusion was written across the face of the scheming man. At that exact moment, Sienna dropped her glass. The glass shattered across the floor. The sharp crash shattered the suffocating atmosphere. Sienna brought both hands to her throat. Her face twisted in pain. She could not breathe. Her eyes looked at me in complete panic. Her body began to convulse violently. She collapsed onto the dining table, sending dishes and plates crashing to the floor. The poison spread far too quickly. It was far more powerful than I could ever have imagined. Gideon rushed toward Sienna and grabbed her. For the first time, he appeared genuinely panicked, but he was not worried about his wife's life. He was terrified because the plan had gone completely wrong. He looked at me with the eyes of an animal trapped with nowhere left to run. Gideon's screams echoed throughout the suffocating dining room. The fateful dinner had turned into a scene filled with blood and tears. Retribution had arrived far sooner than expected, but the true cruelty hidden behind my son-in-law's mask would not be fully revealed until the minutes that followed. Gideon frantically shook Sienna's shoulders. She had completely lost consciousness. Foam gathered around her mouth. Her eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. The sight should have shattered the heart of any father, but my heart felt as cold as ashes. I stood silently at the head of the dining table. I looked at my son-in-law with the eyes of a judge observing a condemned man. Gideon's panic reached its peak. He pulled out his phone. His fingers were trembling so badly that he entered the wrong passcode 3 times. But he did not dial emergency services. He called an unknown number instead. In a furious whisper, he said that the plan had failed and that the poison had gone to the wrong person. The moment he noticed me approaching, he ended the call. The most infuriating moment came when I reached for my phone to call an ambulance. Gideon lunged forward. He slapped the phone from my hand. It crashed onto the floor, the screen shattering instantly. He stepped in front of me, his face twisted into the savage expression of a monster. He shouted that no one was allowed to call anybody. He was afraid the police would arrive. He was afraid doctors would discover the specialized poison he had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars obtaining through the underworld. He was willing to let Sienna slowly die on the dining table if it meant saving his own worthless skin. Disgust rose into my throat. This man possessed not a shred of humanity. He was willing to step over his own wife's body to protect himself. But he had made one fatal mistake. Silas had been standing at the dining room entrance for some time, holding a phone that was actively recording. And from outside, the distant sound of ambulance, sirens, and police vehicles was already growing louder. I had called them before I ever sat down at this dinner table. 10 minutes later, the emergency team rushed into the room. They placed Sienna onto a stretcher and immediately began resuscitation efforts. The lead physician looked at the spilled wine on the table. He collected a sample of the liquid and examined it. His expression changed instantly. He looked directly at Gideon before turning to the police officers who had just entered the room. The doctor stated with certainty that the quantity of poison involved was far too large to be accidental. This was an intentional attempted murder. Gideon stepped backward. His back struck the cold wall. He looked around the room and finally realized that the trap had completely closed around him. But evil people always have one last desperate move. As the officers approached, Gideon suddenly pointed straight at me. He shouted at the top of his lungs, accusing me of something horrifying, a false accusation that had the potential to turn the entire investigation upside down. Gideon pointed directly at me. He shouted at the police that I was the one who had poisoned my own daughter. He accused me of wanting to keep the entire $68 million for myself, and claimed that I had committed a cruel and ruthless act. Tears appeared on command. He played the role of a grieving husband who was about to lose his wife. The officers immediately turned their attention toward me with suspicion in their eyes. My silence only made them more cautious. But I was not worried. A seasoned businessman never enters a battle without preparing his weapons first. I gave a slight nod toward Silas. The young waiter stepped forward and handed his phone, still playing the recording, to the lead detective. Gideon's shouting in the dining room echoed clearly through the audio. The recording proved that he had tried to prevent anyone from calling for emergency help. It proved that he knew about the poison. The color instantly drained from Gideon's face. At that exact moment, a team of private investigators I had hired earlier entered the room. They carried a thick stack of documents. Justice was finally beginning to unfold in a deeply satisfying way. They presented evidence that Gideon could not deny. For months, he had secretly monitored my financial accounts. Most damning of all was a forged draft of my will bearing a counterfeit version of my signature. According to that document, if I died, my entire estate would transfer directly to Sienna. Immediately afterward, Gideon would gain full control over everything. An even more horrifying truth emerged when investigators examined Gideon's finances. He was carrying gambling debts totaling $400,000 with underground casinos. Every one of those debts had been signed in Sienna's name without her knowledge. He had pushed my daughter into a corner. He had turned her into an accomplice in a plan to kill her father in exchange for money to erase his debts. Pain and disgust rose to unbearable levels inside me. The daughter I had raised for 36 years had been manipulated by this broken man until she had lost all sense of humanity. The police immediately escorted Gideon to the hospital where Sienna was receiving emergency treatment so they could continue questioning him. There, in the hospital corridor, the psychological pressure finally shattered him. When a doctor informed him that Sienna might spend the rest of her life in a vegetative state, Gideon made a fatal mistake. In front of detectives, he shouted a single sentence. She wasn't supposed to drink that wine. That statement was the clearest confession possible. He had admitted that the wine had originally been intended for me. The most satisfying moment had finally arrived. The lead detective needed no further evidence. He pulled out a pair of handcuffs. A sharp metallic click echoed through the hallway. Gideon's wrists were locked together on the spot. He collapsed to his knees on the cold hospital floor. The punishment he deserved was now waiting for him. But this story could not end there. As the first light of dawn slowly appeared on the horizon, I still had one final truth to face. Would my daughter wake up and live long enough to hear the final judgment from her father? Gideon Cross was sentenced to 27 years in prison without parole. It was a fitting price for his greed and cold-blooded cruelty. Sienna was fortunate to survive thanks to the doctor's timely intervention. But her brain suffered severe damage. She would spend the rest of her life confined to a wheelchair. Pain tears through my heart every time I look at my only daughter, who was once born with every advantage, now living with a permanent disability. But justice is justice. Betrayal always comes with a very high price. I did not abandon her. I established a conditional trust fund through a bank. The money is sufficient only to cover her medical expenses and professional care for the rest of her life. She will never again have access to a single dollar of that $68 million fortune. As for Silas, the kind-hearted waiter, I paid for his entire college education so he could fulfill his dream of earning a degree. He deserved a bright future after the quiet act of courage he showed that night. I stood alone on the balcony of my home overlooking Lake Norman. The first light of dawn was slowly breaking across the horizon. The lake's surface was calm and crystal clear, like a mirror reflecting my life back at me. 42 years of struggle in the business world had brought me success and wealth. Yet in the end, what remained was a cold dining room and a shattered family. Money does not destroy families. It merely reveals the truth that was already hidden inside them. Human greed is a bottomless abyss. If we fail to control it, it will consume everything we hold sacred. Sienna's betrayal left a deep scar on my heart, but I chose to face it and move forward. Overcoming betrayal is not about revenge. It is about refusing to let darkness become the final chapter of your life. This story is a reminder of the power of kindness between strangers. If you found value in it, please share it and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next awakening truth. Thank you for listening to my story. Cherish the people beside you before greed blinds them. Goodbye, and I will see you again. That night, the rain poured relentlessly. A runaway container truck barreled straight through the US 41 intersection. The sound of metal tearing through the night echoed everywhere. Tires screamed across the soaking wet pavement. And then came an impact powerful enough to crush everything. In the instant, my SUV rolled over the world, completely collapsed. Blood, darkness, absolute silence. My brain felt like a system that had suddenly lost power. My body was motionless. But one thing was still functioning: awareness. I wasn't dead. I was simply trapped inside my own body. I could still hear everything. I could still feel every breath. And there, on the boundary between life and death, I witnessed a horrifying truth. The machines said I was unconscious. My family said they wished I would never wake up. Both were wrong, and that mistake cost them everything. Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. Grab a drink, some snacks, get comfortable, and remember the people in these stories had every opportunity to do the right thing, they simply chose not to. Leave a comment with the number 1 so we can continue the story, and hit subscribe. You're going to enjoy this one. My name is Matt Harris. I'm a logistics coordinator. For the past 30 years, my job has been managing risks and handling incidents along transportation routes. I control every variable. I calculate every second of delay. But I forgot one fundamental rule of this industry. The worst accidents always happen on the roads you know best. Yet that very disaster helped me realize that the family system I had devoted my life to building, protecting, and operating had actually been rotten for a long time. The people I loved most were standing around my hospital bed. They weren't looking at me with concern. They were looking at me like defective cargo that needed to be cleared out to free up space. They didn't know I could hear them. They thought I was nothing more than an empty shell. They started discussing how to divide my assets while I was still barely hanging on. It was ridiculous. After a lifetime of managing global supply chains, I had allowed a pack of vultures to manipulate things right inside my own home. But they overestimated their plan and overlooked one crucial detail. The pungent smell of antiseptic flooded my senses. The steady beeping of the heart monitor echoed beside my ear. I was lying in the intensive care unit of the central hospital. Locked-in syndrome was a disgusting experience. My eyes could not open. My fingers could not move. I was like a prisoner trapped inside my own flesh. Yet my hearing had become cruelly sharp. The hospital room door was slightly ajar. I heard footsteps entering. The familiar click of high heels belonged to Sandra, my wife. Accompanying her was the head physician. I could feel her warmth as she stood beside my bed. But the words that came from her lips were as cold as ice. She asked the doctor about my condition. Her voice did not tremble. Not a single tear fell. She only wanted to know when it would all be over. The doctor explained the extent of the brain damage. He said I had a chance of waking up, but it would require time and enormous expenses to keep me alive. At that moment, I heard my wife sigh. It was a sigh filled with calculation, not despair. She lowered her voice. She told the doctor that 58 years was already a complete life. She did not want to see her husband suffer in a hospital bed. The words sounded compassionate, but in reality they were a death sentence. She was deliberately steering the doctor toward an extreme decision. Only 3 days had passed since the horrific accident at the US 41 intersection. 3 short days. That was the full extent of the patience my wife of 30 years was willing to give me. She was not waiting for a miracle. She was rushing to shut the door on my survival. The rustling of paper filled the room. Sandra pulled a document from her handbag. It was a DNR order, a do not resuscitate directive. If my heart stopped beating, the doctors would not intervene. They would allow me to die naturally. It was a death warrant disguised as loving concern. I lay there, my chest rising and falling with the rhythm of the ventilator. I wanted to scream. I wanted to strangle the wretched woman standing in front of me. But my body had completely betrayed me. Helplessly, I listened to the click of a plastic pen cap. The faint scratch of a pen across paper followed. Sandra had signed it. She signed it in blue ink, the color of hope, yet she was using it to end my life. As she signed, she whispered that this was the best thing for all of us. My entire command system was clogged with rage. The woman I had devoted myself to, the woman who had spent the money I earned through sweat and sacrifice, had decided to pull the plug on me after only 72 hours. But this cruelty was merely the opening act of a much larger play. Her scheme did not involve only herself. The hospital room door opened once again. This time, the footsteps belonged to people I knew better than anyone. The real vultures had smelled the decay and were beginning to gather for their share of the spoils. The hospital room door shut firmly. Heavy footsteps entered. It was Carl, my 28-year-old son. Right behind him was Eva, my youngest daughter. They did not rush to my bedside. They did not take hold of their father's cold hand. The first thing they did was pull up chairs around the coffee table. The aroma of expensive coffee filled the room. Carl began flipping through stacks of documents. He did not ask his mother how much hope I had left. The first thing out of his mouth was a question about my bank accounts. He was reviewing my financial records. He used economic terminology to analyze his father's death. He talked about the liquidity of the inheritance assets. He calculated how long it would take to convert the house, the parcels of land, and the company shares into cash. His mind worked like a soulless computer. He wanted everything liquidated the moment I drew my final breath. Eva sat scrolling through her phone. She complained in an irritated tone. She said having to drive 20 miles to visit her father was extremely inconvenient. She was worried that this schedule would interfere with her vacation plans for next week. The daughter I had once spoiled like a princess, the one who never hesitated to demand expensive designer handbags, now viewed her father's survival as nothing more than a transportation burden. I lay there. Every word they spoke pierced my ears like sharpened knives. My chest tightened. A wave of disgust rose and lodged in my throat. My 21-year-old son had already scheduled my death into his financial plans. They viewed my life as inventory that needed to be liquidated for capital. Sandra made no attempt to stop them. In fact, she nodded in agreement with the figures Carl presented. The three people I had once called family sat together, calculating the day I would die so they could divide the spoils. They methodically and coldly assigned ownership of every car and every joint account. But this cruel family meeting was not finished yet. Carl suddenly lowered his voice. He mentioned a name that instantly froze the atmosphere in the room. Adrian. My stepson, the one I had spent my youth raising and eventually entrusted with the position of vice president of the company. Carl said Adrian had been making some highly suspicious moves at the office. At that very moment, while I was not even dead yet, the child I had trusted most was allegedly preparing to strike a fatal blow from behind my back and seize the work of my entire lifetime. The hospital room became terrifyingly quiet the moment Adrian's name was mentioned with suspicion. Adrian was Sandra's son from her previous marriage. I met him when he was a timid 5-year-old boy. I raised him as if he were my own flesh and blood. I paid every dollar of his college tuition. I bought him his first house when he got married. When he wanted to study business, I brought him into my logistics company and steadily helped him climb the ladder until he became executive vice president. I had given him every privilege a father could possibly give a son. But my kindness had only fattened a greedy wolf. Carl opened another file on his computer. He began reading reports from the corporate office aloud. Adrian had not visited the hospital a single time since the accident. Instead, he had been busy doing something else. He was pushing for an emergency board meeting. His goal was to rapidly liquidate the company's fixed assets. He wanted to sell off the core trucking fleet and consolidate ultimate control in his own hands. His justification was that the company needed immediate restructuring because its leader had been incapacitated. Sandra showed no surprise at Carl's information. In fact, she completely supported Adrian's plan. She said Adrian was doing the right thing. The company needed to remain in the hands of family before creditors started tearing it apart. Family. According to her definition of that word, my name was nowhere on the list. Adrian's coldness, after everything I had done for him, struck my pride like a lethal blow. He had forgotten every loan I had guaranteed on his behalf. He had forgotten that the vice president's chair he occupied had been placed there by my own hands. He was prepared to erase me while I was still fighting for breath in a hospital bed so he could sit in the chairman's seat. The betrayal exceeded the limits of what any human being could endure. I could feel my blood boiling. The rage I had suppressed for so long transformed into a dark source of energy. My body began showing small reactions. My heart rate suddenly accelerated on the monitor. The rapid beeping filled the room. Sandra glanced at the screen, but she assumed it was nothing more than an ordinary physical spasm. She had no idea that my mind had fully activated survival mode. They believed they controlled the entire game. They believed the signed DNR order would remove the final obstacle from their path. But they were wrong. My internal system audit was complete. I knew every face, every scheme, every parasite feeding on my life, and fate had granted me a second chance to turn the tables. Then at last a miracle happened, one that completely shattered every part of their plan. On the 7th day after the accident, I opened my eyes. The white light of the hospital room stung my vision, but what truly made me sick were the faces surrounding my bed. Sandra, Carl, Eva, and Adrian, they were all there. The moment the doctors announced signs of my recovery, they rushed in immediately. I saw the shock flash across Sandra's face. The mask of fabricated joy was hastily put back on. She threw her arms around me and burst into dramatic tears. She said, "Thank God for giving me a second chance at life." Carl and Eva stood beside her, eagerly joining in, claiming they had been so worried they could barely eat or sleep. Adrian stepped forward, gripped my hand firmly, and assured me that the company was stable and that everyone had simply been waiting for me to wake up and lead again. A flawless performance. If I had not heard everything they had said over the previous 7 days, I might have been moved to tears. But I was a logistics coordinator. I understood how to observe and analyze behavior. Their urgency was a symptom of panic. The DNR order no longer mattered. Their plan to divide my estate had been stopped at the gate. They were afraid I would discover the truth. So I decided to give them exactly what they wanted. I relaxed my facial muscles. I stared at them with dull, vacant eyes. When Sandra asked whether I recognized her, I took several long seconds before slowly nodding. I spoke in a weak, fragmented voice. I pretended to be mildly confused from the effects of the accident. I asked simple, foolish questions about the date and my work. I wanted them to believe my brain had been damaged. I wanted them to think that the sharp, intelligent Matt Harris they once knew was gone, replaced by a confused 58-year-old man who would be easy to manipulate. As they watched my sluggish behavior, I noticed a subtle sense of relief in all 4 of them. They exchanged glances. Small knowing smiles began to appear. They believed they could continue their scheme under the guise of caring for a confused father. They believed they had already won, but they had no idea that my mask was the most dangerous thing in the room. This fake confusion was my passport to quietly investigate the rotten system I had built around myself. I needed evidence. I needed precise numbers to execute a complete lockdown. And the moment I was discharged and returned home, I secretly established an underground network of audits and investigations. What I discovered afterward was even more horrifying than the conversations I had overheard in that hospital room. I returned home with a cane and a sluggish gait. My family believed they were caring for a confused invalid. They freely plotted and schemed right in front of me. What they did not know was that behind the half-closed door of my study, I had already launched a large-scale investigation. I did not act alone. As a logistics professional, I understood how to leverage specialized resources for maximum effectiveness. I secretly contacted Ray, my longtime attorney, and Frank, a seasoned private investigator. We communicated through a disposable phone that I kept hidden inside a concealed safe. Their mission was simple: trace every financial transaction and every suspicious action taken by my family members during the time I had been hospitalized. Numbers do not lie. Just 3 days later, Frank sent me an encrypted file. I opened it at midnight while the entire house slept. Financial reports from the company appeared on my computer screen. My heart tightened as I reviewed the flow of funds. Adrian, the stepson I had supported with unwavering loyalty, had begun draining the company months earlier. He had created a shell company called Cooper Logistics LLC. Through that company, Adrian arranged fraudulent service contracts and inflated the cost of incoming supplies. The total amount he had embezzled reached $500,000. He had taken advantage of my hospitalization to legitimize the paperwork behind those transactions. He had even signed my name on company disbursement authorizations. His greed had left a massive financial hole in the operating system I had spent my entire life building. The betrayal of the son I had raised sent a chill through my body. But that was not the worst thing Frank uncovered. As he traced personal accounts and travel records connected to the other family members, he discovered another disgusting truth. A dark secret directly involving Sandra and the savings I had accumulated over a lifetime. The next file from Detective Frank contained a series of high-resolution photographs. Sandra appeared on my computer screen. She was not out shopping as she had claimed. She was standing in front of a luxury penthouse downtown with a younger man. His name was Scott Wheeler, her personal fitness trainer. They had been together for 14 months. While I spent my nights managing shipments and solving crises, my wife had been spending my money on her younger lover. But the deepest wound was not the betrayal itself. To a logistics professional, this was a deliberate and systematic budget leak. Sandra had used our joint accounts to purchase a luxury sports car for him. She had paid for their extravagant vacations. Even worse, Frank uncovered evidence that Sandra had forged my signature. While I lay unconscious after the accident, she had fabricated documents granting herself full power of attorney. She was quietly transferring ownership of our home into the names of herself and her lover. This woman did not merely want me dead. She wanted to strip away every dollar and every brick I had spent 30 years building with my own sweat and sacrifice. She intended to turn me into a homeless man while I was still lying in a hospital bed. I sat alone in the darkness, my fists clenched so tightly that my fingernails dug into my palms. The initial pain had disappeared. All that remained was a deadly calm. I analyzed the affair the same way I would investigate a major inventory loss in a warehouse. Sandra and her lover were toxic links in the chain. They believed they had concealed their tracks perfectly. They believed I was a confused old man who no longer had the ability to defend himself. If you've made it this far, then perhaps this story has been interesting. Please do us a quick favor, like and subscribe. Leave a comment with the number 5 so I know you've watched this far, and tell me how you think the story will end to see whether your prediction is correct. Many people watch without doing so, but it costs you nothing and means a great deal to us. Every piece of evidence was now safely in my possession. From Adrian's embezzlement scheme to Sandra's affair, everything had been carefully traced, documented, and stored. The vultures believed their feast was approaching. What they did not know was that I had already prepared a very special delivery. A logistics operation of revenge had been set in motion. The truth was about to be revealed during the most important family event of all, a celebration they would never forget for the rest of their lives. I'm not a vindictive man. I'm a logistics professional. I like things to be clean, orderly, and efficient. When a supply chain breaks down, you don't sit around crying about it. You identify the faulty link and isolate it. My family had become a system rotten from the inside out. It was time for me to execute the most efficient liquidation process possible. I began preparing for the final delivery while maintaining the appearance of a confused old father. Every day I sat in the living room with a vacant stare. I allowed Sandra to spoon-feed me soup. I let Carl and Adrian openly discuss selling the trucking fleet right in front of me. But when night fell, Attorney Ray and I quietly carried out a series of legal and highly confidential asset transfers. The first target was the joint account Sandra and I shared. I silently withdrew $800,000. It was the most liquid portion of the cash reserve, the very money she intended to use to support her lover, Scott Wheeler. I transferred every dollar into an offshore trust that could not easily be traced or recovered. Sandra never noticed. She was far too confident in my supposed confusion. In fact, she did not even bother checking the account balances. Next came the new will. I signed documents revoking every previous inheritance arrangement. In the new will notarized by Ray, I completely rewrote the distribution percentages. Sandra, Carl, Ava, and Adrian would each receive exactly $1,000. The figure carried a deeply ironic message. It was enough to prevent challenges based on minimum inheritance claims, and it was enough to mock the greed that had consumed them. As for Adrian and Cooper Logistics, I forwarded the complete evidence package regarding the $500,000 in embezzled funds to the Financial Crimes Division. I requested only one thing: keep everything confidential until the exact date I specified. I wanted the strike to land when they were least prepared. I had not forgotten Carl and Eva either. I withdrew my financial guarantee on Eva's mortgage loan. I issued notice terminating Carl's employment with the parent company for ethical violations. Every step was scheduled with minute-by-minute precision, just like a delivery route that allowed no margin for error. The celebration of Sandra's and my 30th wedding anniversary was approaching. Sandra had planned the event long ago as a public display of happiness for neighbors and business associates. She had even ordered an elegant blue gown so she could shine throughout the evening. I agreed to fund every expense of that lavish celebration. I wanted every witness to their betrayal present. The stage had been built. The special envelopes had been sealed. The audience would soon fill every seat. But the most terrifying part of this reversal was not hidden inside those envelopes. It was hidden inside a surprise gift. A gift so devastating that even Sandra could never have imagined it waiting for her when she stepped onto that stage. The chandeliers in the five-star hotel ballroom shone brilliantly overhead. The clinking of crystal glasses echoed through the room. More than 100 guests, business partners, and neighbors alike mingled and laughed. Sandra stood at the center of the stage. She looked stunning in an elegant blue silk gown. A glass of wine rested in one hand while the other supported me as I pretended to walk slowly with my cane. Everyone applauded a marriage that had supposedly endured for 30 years. They praised Sandra as the devoted wife who had helped her husband recover from the horrific accident at the US 41 intersection. Adrian stood nearby in a tailored suit, carrying himself with the confidence of a future chairman. Carl and Eva smiled brightly, already anticipating the inheritance announcement they believed Sandra had carefully arranged. Sandra stepped up to the microphone. In an emotional voice, she spoke about love, sacrifice, and how family was life's only true refuge. I stood below the stage and watched her performance. The deadly calm within me had reached its peak. The supply chain of revenge had arrived at its delivery point. I slowly stepped onto the stage and signaled the sound technician to cut Sandra's microphone. Then I announced that I had 4 special envelopes I wished to personally present to my beloved family members in honor of this important occasion. I called Carl up first. I handed him a white envelope. Eagerly, he opened it in front of the cameras. His smile froze instantly. Inside was not a property deed. It was his termination notice from the company, along with documentation revoking the luxury vehicle the company had provided him. Carl stared in disbelief, all color draining from his face. I turned to Eva and handed her the second envelope. It contained official paperwork from the bank, informing her that I had withdrawn my financial guarantee. Unless she paid her debt, her house would be foreclosed the following week. Eva let out a sharp cry and nearly collapsed. The crowd began whispering. Confusion spread throughout the ballroom. Sandra turned pale and attempted to seize the microphone, but I stopped her. Then I handed her the third envelope. Inside were divorce papers, accompanied by a complete set of high-resolution photographs documenting her relationship with her personal trainer, Scott Wheeler. The documents proving that she had forged my signature to transfer ownership of our home had been enlarged and printed as exhibits. They scattered across the stage floor for everyone to see. Sandra stood frozen in her blue gown as the crowd stared. The image she had spent years building was stripped away in a matter of seconds. Finally, I looked toward Adrian. I did not hand him an envelope. Instead, I turned toward the ballroom entrance. The large doors swung open. 4 investigators from the Financial Crimes Division entered. They walked directly to the stage and announced Adrian's arrest on charges related to the embezzlement of $500,000 and the falsification of corporate documents connected to Cooper Logistics, LLC. The metallic click of handcuffs locking around Adrian's wrists echoed through the microphone system. He screamed Sandra's name in desperation. The ballroom became a battlefield of humiliation. The same 4 people who had once gathered around my hospital bed were now trembling, crying, and trying to gather the shattered pieces of their deception. They stared at me with pure terror. They could not understand how a supposedly confused old man had orchestrated such a devastating reversal. But my game was not over yet. The final blow was not waiting inside that ballroom. It was waiting on their phones. And it would arrive the moment I walked out the door. Adrian's screams and Sandra's sobs gradually faded behind me. I slowly walked out of the ballroom of the five-star hotel. I never looked back, not even once. My new SUV was already running at the entrance. I climbed inside and tossed the cane onto the passenger seat. My entire system was finally clean. I drove into the night heading north. Rain began to fall again, just like it had on the night of the horrific accident at the US 41 intersection. But this time, my mind was completely free and at peace. The phone resting on my dashboard vibrated nonstop. Hundreds of calls and messages from Sandra, Carl, and Eva poured in. They begged. They explained. They pleaded for forgiveness. I pressed send on a single group message to all of them. I heard every single word. There is nothing left to say. Our 30-year relationship is over. I'm very glad you've stayed with this story until the end. Join our community by hitting the like and subscribe buttons to enjoy more real hard-hitting stories centered around family relationships. And as always, thank you for being part of this space. This journey taught me an expensive lesson about human nature. Never underestimate the silence of a man who has spent his entire life building something. When such a man becomes silent, it does not mean he is weak or accepting defeat. It means he is observing, analyzing, and preparing for the most decisive course of action. Trust is something that must be protected, but truth is the only thing that endures. Betrayal can disguise itself with sweet words, but financial records and real-world actions will always expose the truth. True happiness is not found in the amount of wealth you possess. It is found in the people who genuinely deserve to stand beside you when your life falls apart. I lost a counterfeit family, but I reclaimed my life and my freedom.